And welcome back to Mixed Media Live. We're back on another Monday at 7:30. Looks like this is going to be our regular time, and I haven't updated all the things, as you can see. Oh, that way. There we go. And we're back for our weekly live podcast. So we're here talking about our favorite things, basically anything art-related, whether it's music, movies, gaming, pretty much any topic about those things. That's what this show is about. So if you're in the chat right now, would love to hear from you, to say hello. And this is going to be one fun show, I think. It's going to be a good one. So without further ado, we'll introduce ourselves. So my name is Irving Nestor. I'm a filmmaker and media entrepreneur. I own a company called Ariella based out of Mount Carmel, Pennsylvania.
Hi, I'm Ben Costello. I'm a flute player and a media composer living in Los Angeles.
And I'm Nathan Nestor. I'm a 3D modeler and game developer.
Sweet. And a few housekeeping notes before we start our little discussion for the day. Shout out to two awesome people, 909 Crime and Rob Sharma, for supporting us at mixedmedia.locals.com. You can join them by going to mixedmedia.locals.com. That's our support page. It's kind of like Patreon. There are a few perks there. One of the cool things is that you can, or two cool things that are very unlike Patreon. You can join for free, meaning that it's an open community. Technically, once you join there, you can see free posts, or you can see that there are posts and that may be hidden behind a paywall or whatever. I think 99% of our posts right now are free. So if you want to go on there and just surf whatever is on there, some of the stuff is related to my channel, which is the second cool thing, that it's sort of like a bundled community, basically. So I'm putting my premium content from my YouTube channel on there as well. That has been quite challenging. A lot of work. A lot of editing. A lot of hours in the editor. But that's okay. So if you want to go check that out, go to mixedmedia.locals.com. It is worth the subscription, I think. So that's our sponsor for today. Sponsored by our own community. There you go. So how was your guys' week?
It's been all right. I've been working on. I think I may have mentioned something prior about. I literally had this in my head. I forget what it was. I remember I mentioned something about this, but I'm working on a Discord bot that for the game Yummy Hustle that will display information about certain moves and stuff like that. I remember what I mentioned. Prior, I mentioned the idea of decompiling the game Yummy Hustle. I think I said I saw some stuff in the files or something like that, right? So the reason why I actually did that was because I was making a Discord bot that essentially, there's two parts to it, right? There's the backend part, which essentially is a database that scrapes information from the game that will gathers data about all the different moves and stuff like that, because it can get quite, not complicated necessarily, but like there's a lot of things, a lot of numbers in the game. Right. That aren't like readily available by in game and stuff like that. So it finds those numbers, puts it in a database. Second part is the front end, which is Discord bot that you can interact with and get that data. The back end part is pretty much done already, and the only part left is the front end. So yeah, that's been my week.
I think it's been a pretty genius move that Discord has been encouraging developers to make their UI out of Discord. It's quite genius, I think.
Yeah, because the alternative is for me to make a website, right? Which I've thought about, but it's like the overhead for making a website is a lot more than just making a Discord bot. Yeah,
makes sense. Also,
so on Skype, my video is freaking out like it was last time, and I assume that's not happening for anyone else, but are you using the right microphone, Irving? Because my audio might also be freaking out. I can't tell.
Ben, do I sound weird to you at all, or?
You sound like a little bit louder than normal, but other than that, completely fine.
Oh.
So I don't know. It might just be a me thing. But
is it like? Are you unable to understand me?
No.
No, I can understand. Oh. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully it's coming through on the audience's end. And if there are any issues, obviously, always let us know in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Anything interesting for you, Ben?
Nothing, nothing that I can think of. I feel like I was going to say something, but I don't remember what it was. So,
Cool. Yeah, that happens to me too. um, for me, I bought a new lens, which doesn't happen very often. So this one was kind of forced on me to do some contract work, which, I mean, that's not a bad thing. Gotta spend money to make money. That's okay. So not the ideal next lens I probably would have bought, but still exciting nonetheless. It's supposed to arrive today. It's a Sony 16 to 35, so very wide angle lens, which I want anyway. I mean, I love wide angle lenses. Just maybe wouldn't have picked this one, but it kind of fulfills a very industrial purpose. So gets the job done. And the only other thing is there was a second thing. Oh yeah, I'm finishing Better Call Saul finally. The last season. I've been meaning to finish it because I want to cancel my Netflix subscription. It's my last subscription. And I have more than enough movies to occupy my time. So I have no need for it. So yeah, I hopefully will finish it. It's been a great journey thus far, and Better Call Saul.
of course, Netflix. That's more of a news item, I guess. But this, the whole scandal, password sharing, anti-password sharing scandal this week, right?
I don't know anything about that.
I don't know anything about that either.
No?
I actually saw something about passwords in Netflix, but I didn't read it.
So I guess I'm not sure I have this 100% correct about like the genesis of this, but there's something like somewhere someone had accidentally released a policy which is apparently only being implemented in some parts of like South America to limit password sharing, so that you have to, in order to use Netflix, you have to log in once every 35 days in like the primary residence, like with a primary residence Wi-Fi, in order to maintain your account, to prevent password sharing. And this caused an uproar. Apparently, Netflix was like, "Oh, this is not coming to the United States yet," and they,
yeah.
But yeah,
yeah. I actually didn't know about this story. I'm surprised I didn't come across it.
Oh.
But they mentioned this in a quarterly meeting. It just happened. I don't listen to Netflix's like quarterly, whatever stock reports. But I just happened to listen to this one. Like, I feel like it might have been like almost a year ago, where they talked about this specific thing. But the funny thing about those stock meetings is they don't expect anyone but like interested investors to listen to them. So they speak actually more candidly than you would think in those meetings. And they happen to mention, because they were reaching a growth cap. I think that's exactly why I wanted to listen to their meeting. But they're reaching a plateau. This was during COVID, or like maybe right after, the major part of people staying inside. And they had reached their peak growth, and the stock had gone nuts, right? Because they were growing like crazy. And what they needed to do was show that they couldn't be saturated, right? Like, because that's a big problem. Is if you reach your theoretical maximum, you become a dinosaur stock, right? You become like an AT&T, you become something that people buy and they expect dividends, and you're going to have to pay those dividends because they're not expecting growth on the actual stock value itself. And so, long story short, in order to shore their investors' concerns, they're like, well, you see, there's a lot of growth to be had in limiting password sharing. That's basically what they were saying. Was like, there's more room for growth because there's this like group of people. So like, it's funny that it's like, oh, we weren't supposed to whatever, when like this has probably been the works for like a billion years now, and it's probably to please Wall Street. So.
Well, I guess a lot of people, know the irony that they had a whole ad campaign in 2017, like "Love is sharing your Netflix password."
The unfeeling corporation changes its mind. Yeah, well, that's what happens when you're on the race to the bottom, as I talked about last episode, paying what, like $12 a month for Netflix for like access to things that you would pay $10 each for. It's kind of an absurd business model. And so when you've reached your theoretical maximum, but you still haven't made as much money as Wall Street expected you to, because they're like, well, you have the whole world on your platform, so you should be making like Google money like soon, right? And you don't, because it's actually an unsustainable business model. Then you have to panic and do some stuff to try to not be the first one to the bottom. So there you go. And they're kind of the least well positioned, just because they only do movies and shows. Like, I mean, Google doesn't care, Apple doesn't care, Disney doesn't care, really. I mean, that's more of their bread and butter is entertainment, but they've got so many other ways to go. Netflix is just stuck in the niche. So if they don't capitalize on the niche, if they're the first to zero, then they die. So it's an interesting.
They were trying to do gaming stuff at some point, I think. I don't know what happened to that, how that went, but it's certainly not a big thing at the moment, wherever it stands.
Exactly. Because, they have the suits in their office, and they knew that this was going to be a problem always, right? They saw this problem coming from probably 5 to 10 years ago, and now they're facing it. And so all these little ventures, they're trying to diversify so that they don't stop their exponential growth. These companies are based off of debt, which is exponential indebtedness, right? So in order to sustain their indebtedness, they need to have exponential growth to justify it, or else they go bankrupt. So yeah, that's our beautiful, wonderful system of how things work. But yeah. But I don't have news for today, so my rant will suffice.
Actually, I have, I don't remember if I mentioned this before, because this is kind of old news, but I just can't remember bringing it up, but it's like show news, I guess. But Attack on Titan, the final season will be coming out. Did I mention that before?
I don't remember.
Okay, well, the funny part is that it is the final season. So first off, the final season was already released, to be clear, right? But then when at the last episode, they're like, psych, it's actually 2 parts. Just kidding. So it's like the final episode, part 1. So it's actually the final season, part 1. So it's actually the final season, part 2 that'll be coming out. But the final season, the part 2 will be split into 2 parts. So it'll be the final season, part 2, part 1 is releasing. And then there'll be a final season, part 2, and hopefully there's no part 1 to that. Hopefully that is just it.
Not like part 2A and part 2B.
Well, the official name is the final season, the final part, first. I don't know if it's first part or part 1, but I know like the first segmentation is final part. The thing that's coming out, yeah, the first segmentation is final part, which will be split into 2 parts. I don't know if that's first part or part A or part 1, but yeah, it's the final season, final part. Something else. Part 1, I guess.
Well, that's a bit ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's coming out, to be clear, on March 3rd. So, about a month from now. Wait. Yeah, about a month from now. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Was there any gaming news, or?
Oh, yeah, there's. Just because we're on show news, so I was like, you just slip that in. That's actually, that came out, by the way, like 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, I just forgot to say that. But, yeah, in gaming news, we have kind of interesting, some interesting stuff. So, firstly, as we know, Microsoft has been trying to acquire Activision Blizzard, and that's been, the FTC has already challenged that. Where that's going is unknown at the moment, and the European Union has been looking at it, and they decided to also challenge it. So the European Union has expressed concerns about the acquisition. If you don't know, the main sort of points of contention, at least I read the FTC filing. I don't actually know what the European Union has said, but I assume it was something similar, like too much power in the large form factor console industry, and the mobile industry, and the streaming industry, game streaming industry. I mean, those are like the big things. And Google and Nvidia have also hopped in and said, yeah, that's actually, let's not have this happen. By the way, if you don't know, Nvidia is a GPU company, and they are pretty relevant to consoles because every console cycle there's a war between another company called AMD over which company will ship the graphics cards for the consoles that are being produced, and also Nvidia has a streaming service, game streaming service. I forget what it's called, but does exist, and so they are actually a direct competitor to Microsoft in a way, and also need Microsoft for consoles in a way. This got very interesting. They compete in one sector, and they can cooperate in another sector depending on the generation. Yeah, so that's going on. I'm sure it'll take an extraordinarily long time for any of this to be resolved, so maybe I'll stop talking about it for now, and we'll hear about this later in some months or like a year or something. Yeah, other than that, what's interesting is one of you guys from our Discord has won a game jam, which is pretty cool. So the game jam in question is called Metroidvania Month. Jeez, Metroidvania Month, which is, as you might imagine, is a monthly game jam that this one took place from November 15th to December 15th. You have to make Metroidvania. It's a relatively popular game jam. This one having 59 submissions, so beating 58 people is nothing, no small task. So that's actually really cool that one of our community members was able to do that. The community member in question, I don't know how to pronounce your name, so I'm kind of sorry, but it is, I'm guessing, either Kairos or K Kairos, spelled K-K-A-I-R-O-S. The game is called Missing Cats. It is available as a Windows download or Linux download, which is rare and appreciated for me, because I will be playing it. And also, I believe you can run it in the browser as well. So actually, it doesn't really matter what platform you're using. You can find it on itch.io. I guess you could either go to the Metroidvania Month 18 submission page, and I suppose you could find it there, or you can go to kairos.itch.io/missing-cats with a dash between missing and cats. Also link in the chat because that just makes sense. If you're watching on audio only, that's unfortunate because we're currently playing the trailer on the video. But if you're watching on audio only, you should check out the game by the link. So yeah. Yeah. Post it in the chat.
Cool. Yeah, no, K Kairos, or however we're supposed to say the name, has been in our Discord community for a while now. Yeah, want to support him.
Actually, guys, if you don't recall, I mean, well, I guess no one, at least like not part of the Discord community, has heard of him, but he is related to Catholic Game Reviews, which is how we first found out about him. I actually just remembered that. Yes, so if you ever watched the Catholic Game Reviews episode, he was part of that. So yeah.
Yeah, that was our largest guest pool ever, I'm pretty sure.
Was it 2 people or 3? 2 people? I don't actually remember.
Actually, no, I don't remember.
Was it 1 person? I feel like it was 2 at least, right?
It was at least 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, cool. That is all I have for gaming news.
Awesome. Well, if you like this show, definitely share it with someone who would appreciate any of these segments at all. If you don't know, if you hit the share button on YouTube, there's a little thing there you can snip a certain amount of time that you want to point someone to. So if you have like a section where you thought was super interesting or whatever from these live streams, you can always point someone to the specific times that you want to share with them. So if you just hit the share button down below on any platform, we really appreciate that. It really, really extraordinarily helps to get that cosign from our wonderful people. We have this odd thing where we like slowly grow, but no one talks, and that kind of sucks. So if you want to join the community and make this a little bit more lively and more interactive, definitely head over to our Discord as well. The link is in the description. You can go to mixedmediapodcast.com as well. It's a fun time. You can talk to. Honestly, we have like a lot of big brains in our Discord. Like a lot of people who are really, really into what they do, which is pretty cool. So if you want a community like that, definitely head over to our Discord. And with that, we'll be discussing a huge topic right now, which will be the case against Alec Baldwin. And I'm going to go deep into it because we're going to review the entire charging document. as our update, as our official finally update episode on on this story that I've been watching for a long time. For this exact moment where I would have a point that would make sense to share updates with you. This seems like a sensible one, so we'll go over that in the following segment. So stick around. And here we go.
Mixed Media Movies.
And welcome back to Mixed Media. If you've been around, well, thanks for staying by. This is a live show, if you didn't know, that happens every week, every Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And what we do is we talk about everything art-related. And because it's live-streamed, it's all one giant segment technically, but some people listening in audio might be hearing this as a separate segment. So that is why I'm reintroducing the show. And if you want to see our live shows, we're streaming on YouTube, Rumble, and Twitch, and the links are always in the description. Let's introduce ourselves all over again. So my name is Irving Nestor. I'm a filmmaker and media entrepreneur. I own a company called Ariella based out of Mount Carmel, Pennsylvania.
Hi, I'm Ben Costello. I'm a flute player and a media composer living in Los Angeles.
And I'm Nathan Nestor. I'm a 3D modeler and game developer.
Sweet. And so I don't want to retread ground from our gigantic 3-part treatment of the initial facts of this particular case. So I highly recommend, if you want to get what was happening at the time, which honestly the bones of it are very factual, it seems, or not, I should say, not in dispute too much. So if you want to go check out that 3-part series, it's called The Death of Halyna Hutchins. There's 3 parts, and you can go check that out. I think there's a playlist on YouTube. I'm not 100% sure, but yes. So I'm not going to be going over I went over how exactly the firearms work, the typical set procedure. I'm going to be glossing over all that stuff right now in favor of taking a very, very legal type analysis of the whole thing. Which I think, even if you don't really care about the law, is probably going to be interesting to you, and you're going to realize that things probably work a lot different than you think, which, I mean, is pretty much always the case when it comes to law. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so a brief overview of the sequence of the terminal events. Basically, there's this movie called Rust. There's this director of photography named Halyna Hutchins. Director of photography is someone who is in charge of the camera department, oftentimes is manning the camera in certain scenes or shots or whatever. It seems like this was rather low budget, so she was probably handling the camera quite a lot. And some DPs just always like to handle the camera, so wouldn't be abnormal either. And the assistant director's name is David Halls. If you didn't know, an assistant director is a quite high, it's the highest below the line position. Oh no, I'm getting a yellow light saying we are tenuously connected to one of our platforms.
Ooh.
Oh no. Oh, it came
okay.
I think it might have been Rumble that was flashing. Okay. Well, it's red again, so we're good. Okay, so yeah, David Halls, assistant director, highest below the line position. He's basically the human schedule, is a funny way to think of a assistant director. Basically, they're in charge of making sure the production gets done on time, within budget, and no one dies. Well, that was poorly said.
Okay.
But that actually is their job. That is literally, pretty much their job description. They're not like an assistant in the way that you would think of, if you didn't know, they're not giving water to the director or something like that. No, they're quite a high position on set. And then you have the director, whose name, oh my gosh, I'm gonna forget it, and I don't think I wrote it down. Ross director. Well, let's see here. Joel Souza. Yeah, there it is. So Joel Souza was the director. He was also shot by the same bullet. Traveled through Halyna and entered Joel Souza, and he was apparently by the monitor that was wired to the camera, basically. So there's a second monitor. He was standing over it, watching the shot. So they were at a practice session, that's not in dispute, where they needed to do a scene where Alec Baldwin would be doing a cross draw. Everyone knows who Alec Baldwin is, right? He's an actor. Okay, there we go. Quite famous, if you didn't know. But yeah, he had to do a cross draw of a Western antique firearm, or antique to us, which is a revolver. And he ended up doing this cross draw with what we call a hot gun, right? So a gun that had a real bullet inside of it. That seems to not be in dispute because there was a question as to whether something was lodged inside of the barrel or something like that, but nope, it was a bullet. The bullet traveled through Halyna and Joel Souza. They both went to the hospital. Halyna died in the hospital. There you go. That is the sequence so that we don't get confused as to exactly what happened. Oh, by the way, down below is some cool Mid-Journey art, as usual. Actually, can you guys guess? Because there are some extra keywords to generate this one that have to do with like mood or like, I guess, I don't know. Can you guys guess?
Serious Alec Baldwin mugshot? I don't know.
No, I guess mood is not the right word. There were like attenuating phrase. There was an attenuating phrase or two.
Unrepentant. Unremorseful. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of. He doesn't look remorseful in that picture, so.
No, it's actually surprising. Oh, go ahead, Nathan.
No, I don't really know, to be honest.
It's
is it, my guess. I don't know. I mean,
go ahead.
I kind of heard part of that, but I was gonna say like I wonder if you said like stylized from like a certain movie or something like that.
No, I just did black and white film as one attenuating phrase, and the other attenuating phrase was 1920s era. So that's why you get like a little bit of a well-dressed gangster type look out of it.
Right.
So yeah, and if you want to play around in the Mid-Journey bot, you can go to our Discord. It's there. Link in the description. Okay. So that's the overview. So how should it have been, or how are these things typically done? Again, really quick overview in the same style. Basically, what happens on sets that use real guns, there's many reasons to use real guns, namely that they are real. We've discussed that in the last episode. And you typically shoot what's called either a blank, which is a cartridge with a powder load that goes bang. It actually has concussive force, meaning that it has no bullet, but it has concussive force, so if you point that up against someone's head and pull the trigger, their head will explode. And that has happened. That's the one other famous case of a death via firearm. One of two other famous cases, actually, I should say. On a set where someone was fooling around with one of those. And there is what's called a dummy round, which is basically a cosmetic round. Really what they want with those rounds is if someone is reloading, they want to see an object go inside the cylinder of the revolver in this particular case. How it should be done, the procedure really is, and I'm going to skip some steps, is the armorer who's in charge of safety, in this case, her name is Hannah Gutierrez Reed, daughter of the famous Thel Reed, who has done a million of these gigs. He's quite famous in Hollywood. He's also a gunslinger, a championship-winning gunslinger, so he's famous in a lot of different respects. His daughter, who was new to armory stuff, was on this set, hired to do this production. I'm pretty sure Thel was actually supposed to do this production himself, but then he had some conflict, couldn't make his flight, and then said, I have a daughter. Maybe convenient, actually, now that I think about it, but yeah. So, yeah, what's supposed to happen is the armor is supposed to be in custody of all the objects that might be dangerous, namely a real firearm that can actually fire a bullet, and they are supposed to hand the gun when ready, which is supposed to be by union rules when you're shooting the actual scene. They hand the gun, they declare it cold, meaning there's no bullet in the there's no powder load in the gun. In this particular scene, they didn't need a powder load, I think, is what I surmise from the summary of facts, is they needed actually just the dummy rounds, right? So, cold, there's no powder load in there, meaning that the gun doesn't go bang when you pull the trigger, in theory, right? What she's supposed to do is check the gun, check every bullet, quote unquote, in this case would be dummy rounds, make sure that they're not real bullets, which is easy to do because they have an easy audible checking mechanism where you ring the bullet next to your ear. We talked about this last episode as well. And if it jingles, that means that it's a dummy round for sure. They also don't look real upon close inspection, so there's that as well. And then you, after you're done checking, you hand it to the assistant director, who is like I said, supposed to make sure no one dies. They're the master of safety on set. They do a check on the weapon as well. Then a third check happens, which is the person who's actually going to be handling and using the actual firearm, which in this case would be Alec Baldwin. So the weapon goes to the last person who's supposed to repeat the check after the armor declares the gun cold to them as well. So, and they're supposed to do like a presentation of the firearm to them in such a way that it makes them confident, and then they're supposed to do an additional check on their own. Okay, that's what's supposed to happen. That's the procedure. That being said, this is extremely rare that this ever happens. Firearms are used like thousands upon thousands of times. Today, probably thousands, or no, maybe not thousands, maybe tens and maybe hundreds, depending on what's going on in Hollywood, of powdered loads were probably shot, or real firearms probably used on a set. So it's not absolutely, it's not really that risky. In fact, I would say there's no risk in any real sense if you just do the procedure as prescribed. In every instance that we've had of someone handling these things poorly to the point where someone actually gets hurt, it's because they violated the rules. Okay. Okay, that's that. Okay. Then there was a rhetorical battle, basically, where Alec Baldwin says way too much. Remember I said at the time, he's talking way too much. Never talk after something like this. Shut your mouth and listen to your lawyers. He didn't do that. He talked a bunch, a lot of updates that I didn't give because, so many interviews about this event. Not a good idea. No matter who you are, do not talk to people about stuff like this if you're not 100% in the clear. Like you get like a prosecutorial, I can't remember the phrase for it, but the prosecutor basically promises not to prosecute you, which is binding. That's why, people don't know this, but this is why Bill Cosby got released, because the prosecutor promised not to prosecute him, then prosecuted him, and then the judge somehow said, actually, that wasn't a promise. Bizarre. And then prosecuted him. He was put in jail, and then he appealed it, and then the promise was found to be binding, and that has nothing to do with his real or not real guilt. I have no clue about any of that, but yeah, that's just an example of that happening. So barring that, you should shut your mouth, basically, or the statute of limitations expiring the facts of your case, basically. Okay, so what has happened now? Basically, we got a news 2 weeks ago that charges were coming for Alec Baldwin and Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, who were the armorers, and that David Halls had taken a plea deal that included no jail time. And my initial reaction, which I think is even more correct after reading the charging documents, is that he probably was the first to say, I'm a snitch on everyone else, so that I don't go to jail. Now, you can dispute the morality of this practice of someone who probably is just as culpable in the chain of events as everyone else, getting off scot-free while everyone else gets charged. but that's the way things work. This happens extremely often in the legal system. If you think about it from a judicial efficiency perspective, you are potentially putting to someone in jail with less testimony, less time, all that type of stuff. By putting one less person in jail and nailing two people who are probably one less person who's probably harder to convict, because David Hall's probably actually had the best case out of them all. So you got the one who's hardest to convict off the table, and you nail the two other ones for sure. So that's a strategy, right? Okay. Now let's go into legal frameworks. So, and this is where a lot of the misconceptions happen with how our legal system works, and I want to clear those up because this is good and educational for your life anyway. And you'll realize you do not want any interaction with the justice system ever in your entire life. Not once, not half a time, not ever. So, and this is why. So there's a difference between civil and criminal, obviously, we know that. But there's a different standard, and we know this in theory, but in practice, it doesn't work the way you think it does. So for a civil case, in order to win a civil case, you need to show a preponderance of evidence, basically, right? So that means 50 plus some infinitesimal amount of evidence goes towards the plaintiff or defendant, and that person wins the case, right? So all it has to be is more likely than not that you did the thing that's illegal, civil, and there's civil liability behind it, right? That's what a civil case, basically the standard is. For a criminal case, there's the famous beyond a reasonable doubt, right? What does that mean? Well, that's very complicated, and in fact, there's not really a definition of that, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who you ask, I guess. Some people define it as 95% plus of the evidence goes to one person's side. Some people say 99.9%. Some people say 90%. Some people say, well, you can't express it as a percent like that, and it's more complicated. But basically, the jury is basically told, if you have a reasonable doubt, you cannot convict. Now, in your own personal life, ask yourself if that ever really happens when you read a news article and you see someone, bank robbery happened on 6th Street and they caught the guys. There's kind of some baked psychology about those who are accused and their culpability just because they're arrested. So, I will say this up front, that though I think it is actually really quite obvious that those who are charged in this particular case are probably guilty just from their own statements, unfortunately, don't talk. Don't talk. I am extremely deferent to defenses. I'm a defense nut because the state often and always has infinite resources compared to any defendant, practically, because the state has the ability to do things that a defendant cannot in a criminal case. And I could go on and on about that, but we don't have enough deference towards defendants in this country. And so what we're supposed to have to charge someone is something called probable cause. Probable cause is going to be familiar, which is 50 plus some infinitesimal percent that you did the thing, right? And then you're charged. That doesn't mean you're convicted. Then you go to trial, and then it's supposed to be 99% or 95 plus percent or whatever it is, that the jury finds you guilty, right? The reality is that's the same standard as preponderance of evidence. But you do a whole trial for preponderance of evidence for civil cases, but you don't do it for criminal cases for probable cause. There are things called probable cause hearings. They used to happen in the United States. They pretty much don't happen anymore in the United States. It's what a grand jury is supposed to do when they indict you. So when you hear a grand jury indicted someone on some charges, that means that the prosecutor brought up charges, the person was arrested, and the grand jury said, yep, we agree that there's probable cause for this case, and that grand jury, then that goes to a criminal jury, which then a different jury, basically, to decide whether or not it's beyond a reasonable doubt after hearing the evidence of the case. There's a common saying amongst the lawyers, which is that a grand jury can indict a ham sandwich. or sorry, a prosecutor can always indict a ham sandwich, which is basically saying that it's not hard to indict someone because the only person talking in a probable cause hearing is the prosecution. So, if you're looking for 50 plus some infinitesimal of a case, and you're only hearing one side of the case, it kind of sounds like 100% of the evidence, right, is for the prosecution side, and of course you indict because you don't hear the other side, right? So yeah, that what I'm saying here is, though I think the facts of this case are probably, because it came out of their own mouths, probably very bad for them, probably should go to jail, as was my analysis in the prior episodes. Once we've got charges, my natural inclination is in the defense, right? I really like to uphold that standard of innocent until proven guilty, right? Because we need more of that. So hopefully that just, assuages any concerns of bias as I go through the facts as we go forward. Okay. Because even Alec Baldwin is at a disadvantage versus the state. Okay. Okay. So let's see. So there's a misunderstanding now in the rhetoric that happened post the incident, right? So basically, most of the news articles wanted to frame this as an accident, and that this was the fault of allowing the gun to be involved at all. Well, legally speaking, that's nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. There's a new legal standard for accidents, right? So what is an accident? A genuine legal accident is something as minimal as simple ignorance to as, I guess, special as an act of God, which is an actual term, by the way, a legal term of art, right? So a simple ignorance would be I think someone gave this example. You work in a factory where there are boxes, right? And you're supposed to move boxes around as part of your job from point A to point B. And this factory has a policy against handling firearms, and these loaded firearms especially, in these boxes, right? Like they just don't do that, right? So you, as a worker, have zero expectation that there's a firearm in any of these boxes, right? Your simple ignorance is that if you drop that box and that box ends up shooting someone because, some set of events happened to put a gun in that box that was loaded, you drop the box and someone dies, that is actually a genuine accident because there is no reason for you to have believed that there was a gun in the box, right? It is purely random in a lot of senses. And therefore, you are not culpable both civilly nor legally, right? So in this situation, you can't be sued or you can be sued for anything, I should say. You could be sued for looking funny. Doesn't mean that person will win, but yeah, you can be sued, but you don't have a case, right? They don't have a case against you, right? If those are the facts, and that's what simple ignorance is. An act of God would be something like, for whatever reason, something decided to spontaneously combust, right? And you just happen to be in the vicinity of this spontaneous combustion, and you're the safety officer, right? So everyone's looking at you like, "Hey, you should have stopped this combustion." But there's no explanation. Like this is just things just combusted, and the whole factory exploded, and there's no reason to think that you should have known, right? That was a possibility that you could mitigate as part of your job. That would also be a genuine accident, essentially. So that's sort of the breadth of that. And so, drill in your head, couldn't have known to do differently. That's a genuine accident. Then you go a step up, you get to recklessness. Negligence, I should say. The negligence and recklessness are words we use interchangeably in our everyday talking, but mean fundamentally different things when you're talking legally. And on top of that, in the charging document, they actually interchange them a few times, which is poor drafting.
Recklessness has a worse connotation, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Because you can be reckless without being negligent. You can know you're being reckless, I guess. Whereas negligence is like, I guess can you know you're being negligent, or is that contradictory?
Well, you've gotten to the core of the issue. Perfect segue.
See.
Negligence is exactly that you should have known something. A reasonable person would have known to do different. So a genuine accident is you couldn't have known. So literally it was impossible to know, or you shouldn't be expected to know that something, some risk should have been mitigated, or some risk shouldn't have been created, right? In the negligence standards, you should have known, but you didn't know, right? So it would be like, let's see, what's a good example of negligence? Would be, let's see, trying to think of it. It's like there are cases of negligence where you handle your car in a very particular manner. I'm trying to think of one where you wouldn't know, though, right? Like, so, you wouldn't necessarily know, but a reasonable person wouldn't know, or should know, right? So it's not, let's say, for example, let's say in some world that using your handbrake to stop at stoplights is actually there are some people who are unreasonable who don't think that that is a bad idea. It doesn't cause some stress on the arresting cable, right? That's how it works in most cars. I'm not a car person, so I don't. And let's say you have a person who always uses their handbrake to stop at stoplights, but then the 100,000th time they do it, the arresting cable snaps, and the wheels move freely into the intersection, and it causes some accident, and someone dies, right? This would be negligence if the person actually doesn't know, in the sense that they didn't intend to do something reckless, but they should have known, because it is reasonable to assume that you should use the vehicle in the way that is intended and taught, even though there's not a specific law about using the handbrake. Probably, I don't know, maybe there is, but there probably isn't a law specific to that, right? But you should know that using the car as described in your manual, using your car the way everyone else uses their car, is the way you should use your car, basically, which is a dangerous item, right? Your car driving is a dangerous activity. So, yes, that is negligence. You didn't know, but you should have known. So, you have no intent to disregard the reasonable choice. But you did do something unreasonable objectively. Or, sorry, reasonably did something unreasonable. That makes sense. That is only a civil liability. So that's not a crime, right? Why is it not a crime? It's not and there's a lot of these cases where people want people to go to jail, and I find that scary because people don't understand the difference. You should not go to jail for this, because there's not something that you don't have, which is called the mens rea. Mens rea is a Latin phrase. I actually don't know what it directly translates to.
Guilty mind.
Okay, there you go. I was going to say guilty mind, but I didn't know if that was actually the direct translation. Mens rea, if you have the mens rea, right, you have the intent to do something illegal, right? So, and in a weird way, you don't actually have to know that there's a law. It's a little odd, but we don't have to get into that to now. But basically, you have to intend to do something illegal, or in this case, you have to intend to do something negligent or reckless in this particular case. This is why the term gets interchanged in the in the filing document, I think. Because basically something rises to recklessness if you knew that there was a risk associated with your action, or that you didn't mitigate a risk that you were supposed to mitigate, and you ignore your obligation to not do the thing or to do the thing, right? In this case, the famous example is drunk driving, right? So a lot of people go to jail for very long times for killing someone in a drunk driving accident. A lot of people ask, well, they didn't intend to do it. because they didn't intend. They were so drunk that they didn't intend. They couldn't make a well-formed decision to drive or not to drive. No, that does not work legally speaking. Why doesn't it work? Because the mens rea is found in you getting drunk and not mitigating your ability to drive to begin with. This is why you are guilty, ultimately. You made the intentional decision to get drunk and to not have keys on you, or to like do something mitigating that was sufficiently mitigating. So
you mean to not have keys on you, right? Wait,
yes.
Am I wrong?
Whatever you said.
Okay.
Yeah. So the decision is found in your initial decision making, not necessarily that you intended to drive into someone's car. That would be murder. If you intended to drive into someone else's car, that would be murder. But it's reckless manslaughter, right? This is the most annoying thing. It's called many different things in many different states. For our purposes here, we'll call it manslaughter because that's what the New Mexico statute calls it, right? In other states, it's called reckless killing of another, even, or like, whatever. Manslaughter is what we'll call it, because New Mexico calls it manslaughter. Manslaughter is when you are criminally reckless, which is to say you were reckless. And you knew there was an unjustified risk, and you consciously disregarded it. That is what recklessness is. So does that make sense with like difference between negligence and recklessness? Okay.
Yeah.
Then there's the worst, which is intentional killing or intentional something, which is, that's not very complicated, right? So no need to go into that. If you murder, incidentally, is just intending to kill someone. A lot of people think that first-degree murder requires, obviously it's different every state, but this is the principle behind it is the same. That you have to like plot the murder in order for it to be first-degree murder. Absolutely false. You just have to have what's called malice, and malice doesn't mean you were like malicious, even though that's the same word root. Malice actually means in this particular case that you intended the death in such a way that you knew what you were doing was depraved, right? So that requires zero planning. I can do that in 1 second. I can do that in a half second. So you can charge someone with first-degree murder even if they don't plan something. Here's a good example. You're in an argument. You're a heated argument. And then you walk away. You come back. The other person's cooled off. Maybe you're not as angry as before, but you have this thought. What if this person just goes away? Then my life will be easier. You pull out the gun, you shoot the person. You form that thought maybe in like half a second potentially, but that's enough planning, I guess. That's not really the word you use at all. That's enough of a malicious mental state to cause you to be charged with first-degree murder, as long as the state can prove that particular fact set. There you go. Often, first-degree murder is overcharged, but that's another discussion for another day. Okay. So now we're in the bubble of recklessness, and we're drilling down a little bit. So now we're getting closer to the Alec Baldwin case in particular. In the world of recklessness, there's legal precedent that there are things called inherently dangerous instruments, which sounds exactly what I mean. That it's pretty straightforward. So, but we're thinking of a firearm in this case. But you don't have to think about a firearm. You can think about if you work at a chemical factory and you deal with like some crazy acid, right? And you're handling it, right? That's an inherently dangerous instrument, even though it may not be a literal instrument, but you get what I'm saying. That still would qualify for the purposes of the law. If you're operating a crane, right? That's an inherently dangerous instrument, right? So it's a gun, it's a crane. It could be practically anything, as long as the object itself is so readily dangerous as to its improper handling would readily cause bodily harm or death, right? So that's what an inherently dangerous instrument is. Now, for guns, unfortunately for the people who are being charged in this particular case, there's a long precedent of guns being inherently dangerous instruments. This should be obvious to anyone. A gun is kind of meant to destroy things. This is, most guns express, and that's not to say that I'm against them at all. Quite to the contrary. But you don't have to, pretend that they're not, made to destroy or kill things. Yeah, that's exactly what they're made to do. So they are inherently dangerous instruments. And because they're inherently dangerous instruments, both the firearms community, the experts firearms community, and the legal system have a long precedent of what recklessly handling a firearm looks like. It's such a long history that there's concise 4 rules that if you do not follow them, you are immediately reckless. If you don't follow, more than one of them, I should say. So, and it'll become clear when I list them out. 4 rules. 1, treat every gun as if it's loaded with the asterisk unless you check, right? Checking means actually checking. It doesn't mean looking at it and be like, yeah, that looks unloaded to me. No, you actually go, and if there's supposed to be blanks in this particular case, or not blanks, dummy rounds in this particular case, you actually check every round, every single time. That's the only time you can say it's unloaded, is when you've done a thorough check. Otherwise, you treat the gun as if it's loaded. Let's say, and this is common practice, let's say I'm at the range, I'm shooting, and in the middle, I don't know, I really have to go to the bathroom. I let my friend watch the gun while I go to the bathroom. I come back, and my friend says, here you go, it's cold. Do I think it's cold? It's cold to him. Is it cold to me? No, that's not what that rule means. It means it's still loaded. You treat it still like it's loaded until you've checked yourself. That's what the first rule means. The second rule means know your target and what's beyond the target. This is completely irrelevant for our particular case, because he's not intentionally trying to shoot, as far as I know, at least. Something really bizarre happens in this case where there's some murder allegation or something. But he wasn't intending to shoot, so that's not relevant. 3, never point the muzzle at something you're not willing to kill or destroy. Makes sense. And 4, never put your finger on the trigger, or inside the trigger guard for that matter, unless you're willing to pull it, right? So until you're ready to pull it, don't put your finger into the trigger guard. Now, you might be saying, well, so how do you ever not recklessly handle a firearm on a movie set? Well, it's because you have to violate 2 things. So there's 2 ways to get to recklessness. Either you violate 1 rule unintentionally, or you use the caveat for that rule, and you then go ahead and violate a second rule intentionally or unintentionally. In this particular case, there was a bullet in the chamber, so someone had to be negligent. In fact, everyone who checked had to be negligent because they didn't intend for there to be a bullet inside of there. And even if they did intend for a bullet to be inside of there, then pointed at a human. So now you've got 2 rules sandwiched, and it's just recklessness, right? This set of 4 rules is not just the parlance at the gun range or in the gun community or in every gun-related YouTube video you'll ever see, people harping on these 4 rules. It's also baked into the legal expectation as well, because these things have been tried so much in courts. So there you go. So, the only way out he has is if he can say that he really didn't know what a gun is. How do you get below recklessness, right? You have to say, I really didn't know. Even if you should have known, right? You should know what a gun is. It'd be quite unreasonable for you to argue for most people. I guess you could in some theory, if you're, born in a place that doesn't have firearms and someone gives you an object you don't recognize. That would be a very, very special case. for sure. And that would probably maybe get you to a genuine accident potentially, right? But the only way you can get out of recklessness, and anyone involved can get out of recklessness, is if they say that they didn't know but should have known. And at that point, they get rid of the criminal charges, and they're definitely liable civilly, and that'd be a lot of money. But money is different from freedom, right? So, and so he would have to say something like, "I really don't know how firearms work at all, whatsoever. Like, I have no idea, no clue at all." Well, we've got a video to share, which is the exact example. Never, ever, ever, not ever, not once, unless you talk to a lawyer, talk to the police, even if they... Here's a hint. If you've been Mirandized, you're a suspect. Like it's kind of shocking how many times people get Mirandized, and they say, well, and then the police officer goes, and police are allowed to lie to you, by the way. The police officer goes, well, I mean, just because I Mirandized you doesn't mean that you're a suspect. That's exactly what that means, or else they wouldn't Mirandize you, because it's only required if you're a suspect. So, he was Mirandized. He was a suspect. So, if you're Mirandized, don't talk to the police. In fact, even if you're not Mirandized, don't talk to the police. Okay. You're never required to. You have a Fifth Amendment right. And even though this guy, Baldwin did a bad thing, probably, I would still advise him to not talk to the police. Unless he was just going to come clean and say, I did the thing. I mean, that's morally acceptable, obviously. You taking responsibility for your actions. But if you're not sure, like, you don't want to go to jail because you're not sure if you actually did the thing, don't talk to the police. Especially then, don't talk to the police. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to play this for y'all. Hopefully I don't get any weird copyright stuff. I don't think I should. But my co-host might not hear this, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm playing this for the audience out there. But this is Alec Baldwin saying a lot of things he shouldn't say. Oh, by the way, all the people on Rumble, hello. I see the number went up a little bit. I hope you're enjoying the show. And hit that like button, which is not a Rumble button anymore, unfortunately. But hit that like button, and that really helps. Okay, so here we go.
We've done this for 2 weeks, and we did it the right way every day. Every day. You're on a set, you rehearse, they bring you what's called a cold gun. The gun is either completely empty, the chambers, or there is a cosmetic piece. So, for example, if you're the camera, and this is going to sound silly and specific, but if I'm pointing the gun close to the camera, you want to see into the cylinder that there's material in there, cosmetic material. So those rounds are cosmetic rounds. Right. They put them in, and you rehearse, or even in a shot when you don't fire. I pulled it up, and you see there's some material inside the cylinder. They'd hand me a cold gun, no charges. They always hand you a cold gun with nothing in it to rehearse. Every time we've done this, I'm here to tell you, to testify that every time we've done this, she's done it right. She cleaned the barrel, made sure nothing was lodged in there. We went hot when they were ready. You always announce, going hot.
So, okay. Well, let's just stop here, right? All right. He said, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, he's saying, did everything right. like, I mean, okay, maybe that doesn't get rid of net recklessness per se, but it really doesn't help you if you're trying to get a jury to just ignore the law and not convict you because they like you and think that you shouldn't be punished, right? Like, there's always that avenue of defense, right, is what's essentially called jury nullification. It's a lot more common than you think. It's a pretend thing to think that it doesn't happen extremely often. It's a purposeful check in the judicial system, actually, to sort of humanize the law a little bit more. You're just not allowed to argue it formally in court. That's all. So, he could have the, I guess, emotional argument that, I mean, look, morally speaking, like, I mean, I trusted everyone else to do the thing, but they were so bad at it. Like, I found out later but here he's saying they're so good, they're so awesome, like, like, everyone is doing their job but me, is practically what he might as well be saying. That don't talk to the police. Anyway, continue.
Ready? And then all of a sudden you're the camera and I shoot away from you. I sit there and I'm like, bang, 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 and flashes are coming out and we shoot the rounds. She cleans the barrel every time and she checks that the rounds are all cosmetic rounds or nothing in the chamber for the rehearsal. She hands me the gun. I'm assuming she's done it the right way. She's done it the last 2 weeks. I put it in the holster. I pull it out slow.
And he says, I'm assuming she did it the right way. Ah, that's bad.
We're rehearsing. We're not filming anything. I pull it out slow, turn, cock the pistol, bang, it goes off, and she hits the ground. And then he starts screaming. And I'm thinking, in a flash round, I could see maybe if there was wadding or there's some stuff that hopped, and maybe it hit you and burned you. As they say, sometimes that happens. But remember, we're rehearsing, so no one's protected. And you're assuming, as we
He says, so remember, we're rehearsing, so no one's protected. What he's referring to, as we talked about in the first episode, is that everyone's supposed to be behind a ballistic shield if they're going to be anywhere near a cone of fire, near where a blank round, when a blank round is being fired. And so he acknowledges that he knows that there's an extra level of protection needed, and no one was doing it, but then he doesn't check anyway. In his own mind, it makes complete sense to say this. Legally speaking, it is stupid, beyond belief, to say this out loud. Because what will the prosecutor say when they get up there is, so you, Alec Baldwin, you knew that they were supposed to be behind ballistic barriers when guns were being used. Yes. So then, you knew that there's an increased risk, because what are else are the barriers for? Oh, yeah, I guess I knew. And then the prosecutor says, basically, okay, so you knew that there's an increased risk, and so you decided then was when you're not going to check the gun. See how you can just flip the whole thing from his own internal logic and just flip it on its head? It's very easy to do. And it's bad.
Every time it's a cold gun for the rehearsal. And I put the gag in the shot, you're the camera, is I have a coat and I have a holster and I pull the coat over and I kind of cup my hands like I folded my hands. And then I'm going to slowly sneak the revolver or the Colt out and turn and shoot these other guys or try to shoot them. I take the coat over the thing, I know the camera's there. I believe, my recollection is she was there, turned a bit, like talking to him. So I think she was hit in the right armpit. But this is all I know, and that is that I take the gun out in the rehearsal, where he wants it very dramatic and very sudden, kind of sneak up on them. I take the gun out, and as it clears, as the barrel clears, I'll turn and cock the gun over here. I turn and cock the gun goes off.
Then here, he admits that he actually cocks the gun, which I'm not going to explain the mechanisms of this particular single-action firearm. You have to go check out our 3-part series to get that. But cocking the gun the gun not being cocked is essentially an additional safety to not accidentally pulling the trigger. So he could have maybe made an argument that still wouldn't have gotten him past recklessness, but again would have been an emotional argument to the jury that, like, hey, not this guy. I don't deserve to be punished by recklessness because I did everything right, except I just happened to not check the dummy rounds this one time that I trusted her. That could have been his argument. But here he admits that he cocks the gun, which you only do if you're intending to fire. This is a big problem, a very big problem. So he can't even he's stripping himself of even the protection of potential jury nullification. That's what he's doing, essentially.
It's supposed to be a cold gun. Nothing. No flash charges, nothing. Now, this is a puzzle to me, and this is making me very emotional now. But in my time, and I'm older now, but when I was younger and I was shooting guns in films, I've never seen a theatrical flash round with the material went through someone's armpit, came out their body, and hit somebody else in the shoulder. Yeah. I'm wondering if your department is prepared to go find out what comes out of his shoulder surgically. Is that a live round?
Oh, so some context. The reason why he acts like he doesn't know what happens is because she doesn't know he died. He doesn't know she died yet. This is like pretty soon after the event. By the way, these police officers are the worst interrogators I've ever seen in my entire life. I don't think it has to do anything to do with Alec Baldwin. I think they just suck, and that department needs to get fixed. This was a terrible interrogation. But he basically says, I've done this so many times, And not once have I seen anything like this happen. To him, that seems exculpatory, like this is some sort of act of God, right? Like, he's almost like, making that internal argument that this is just some act of God. However, in the particular fact scenario, what he's really admitting is I should have known better. He's giving the I should have known part of the reckless side of thing by saying I've done this so many times. That's what's actually happening. He's destroying his own case.
That's what we are actually looking at.
Is that a lot? Because it doesn't make any sense otherwise.
So that's that. I think that's hilarious because it's exactly why you should not talk to the police. Don't do it ever.
I was able to catch most of that by watching on Twitch, by the way.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I put the closed captions to see if I could, see if people could see it from there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's that. Now, I have the charging document, but I'm not going to go through it line by line or anything like that because it's actually really straightforward. I'm just going to go through like a few things that are interesting, basically. So I'm going to switch views actually to do that. Let's see if this works. Aha! There we go. And let me pull up the link real quick. In the meantime, while I'm doing this, if you have... Oh, well, actually, before I even say that, nothing I say in this episode is legal advice. Ever. Never should be... I'm not a lawyer. Never construe what I say in here as legal advice. If you have a legal question, ask a lawyer. There you go. Hashtag disclaimer. Let's see. So let me pull this up real quick. Editing and talking at the same time is difficult. Okay. So here we go. So here's the charging document. A charging document's goal is to lay out the probable cause for a grand jury and a judge, particularly a judge, because they've already presented the case before the grand jury, often before this document is generated, right? So this document is supposed to basically outline a case against him. Does this mean, this is something that's often misconstrued as well, does this mean that these are the only facts involved? Does this mean that there wasn't worse stuff that happened? Does this mean that there is not some exculpatory evidence that would excuse some of the behavior, legally speaking? No, it doesn't. All it means is that this is the state's case for probable cause. Because probable cause is 50 plus something, right? That means that they don't have to lay out their whole case, per se, right? They only have to lay out, probably like the better parts of their case. They don't have to lay out the whole thing, right? With the judge's permission, they can even change their legal theory. So they can change their interpretation of events entirely once the trial, before the trial is started, right? So yeah, that's to say, whenever you see charging documents, don't take it as these are the only things I'm going to see when the trial actually starts. It's often not the case. You usually see more stuff than this. So this is the what they think can get to probable cause. Now, in reality, because our probable cause standard basically doesn't exist, because every time you do a motion to dismiss, which every defense attorney does, unless they're nuts, because it's free and it costs nothing, they're always heard, is they will say, I don't think there's probable cause. They'll argue to a judge that there's no probable cause. Either that, or they'll argue to a judge that that no reasonable jury could convict them, which usually means that there are no facts alleged to the crime. Right, so it would be like if I said someone murdered someone because there was a peanut butter jelly sandwich next to them, right? The fact that there's a peanut butter sandwich next to them has no logical connection. I've made no argument as to why that is connected to the murder. Because I've made no argument, and maybe I couldn't proffer the argument to the judge at the time of arguing either, so I couldn't even, like, when the judge was asking me, well, so what does the peanut butter sandwich have to do with the murder? And I go, I don't really know. No reasonable jury could use the fact of the peanut butter sandwich to convict someone, right? So then you dismiss on those grounds. Okay, so these are the charging documents, and I'll skip the intro because we already know I guess, where it happened and what day it happened and all that stuff. Let's see where the first interesting stuff happens. Okay, so here's the prosecution's layout of the scene of the day. So through these same statements, so these statements collected by presumably police officers and the prosecutor's office, through these same statements, interviews, and evidence, it was determined that after lunch on October 21st, 2021, the crew, production staff, camera crew, and actors were preparing for a scene set in the church. This was not an established rehearsal, nor had filming commenced. So this is sort of an impromptu thing, is what they're saying. At this point, Baldwin was seated in what is referred to and appears to be a church on this movie set. Baldwin was in a possession of a .45 long Colt caliber receiver type firearm. If you don't know what that is, you can watch the first episode. One of a type and kind often used and or seen in Western genre type movies and or sets. The firearm is a single action revolver handgun, which requires the cocking of the exposed hammer, which then rotates the cylinder. Okay, stuff I explained. Now, the interesting revelation there is that it was single action, because there was honestly fake news being peddled by Alec Baldwin. We talked about this first episode, that this might be happening, but there was no way to conclude. There's still no way to conclude. These are just charging documents. So maybe we'll see some opposing evidence from the defense. And again, proven innocent until proven guilty, right? I find it probabilistically unlikely, just by having a brain. But basically, you know, there was some fake news that he had a replica, not a real single action firearm, so one that did not require him to actually cock the gun. So why would he ask his potentially ask or allegedly ask his I guess media partners or crisis managers, that's what they're called. Why would he ask his crisis management firm, or why would they come up with the idea that it was double action? Well, they're trying to remove the intentionality of the act, right? By removing the cocking of the gun as necessary to fire the weapon, right? It's a convenient fact to remove. Incidentally, I'm pretty sure that there's a actual document generated by maybe the FBI, I'm not entirely sure, where they took that very gun, or maybe a similarly made gun, and tried to make it fire without cocking it, and it's literally impossible. As I said, by the way, like guns don't just go off. Not since like 1760 do they just go off at random. Like they haven't gone off at random for like literally ever. So they don't just go off. It requires almost always some level of intention or recklessness. Okay, so let's see here. In front of Baldwin, standing were victims. Okay, we know that part. So we know Joel Souza also got shot. You know that part. Okay, and then we get some details about the shot itself, which were only rumors from the crew. And it turns out that those were correct, at least according to the prosecution. So it says the setup was to be a close-up of Baldwin and firearm as he drew the weapon and pointed it. Halyna Hutchins and Joel Souza were viewing the practice scene on a monitor attached to the camera. Baldwin drew the revolver from the holster, pointed at Halyna Hutchins, and fired the weapon. When reviewing the script and witness interviews for this particular scene and close-up shot, evidence indicates the scene/shot did not require the weapon to be fired. Well, this kind of comports with logic, given the statements of the people involved already, right? Because they were using dummy rounds, something we also talked about in the three-part series, not blank rounds, which then you ask the question, so why did they use the real gun against union rules in the rehearsal? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that, especially because they had a non-firing replica gun, which is a different kind. So there's a set gun category. In there are replica guns and real guns, and we talked about all that stuff. Replica guns are unable to fire, meaning the barrel is either like like just lead, right? Like, there's no barrel basically. Or, it's like stuffed, blocked, nothing can be shot through it. There's no firing pin to actually fire a bullet. A bullet can't go in it, or something prevents it from functioning as a firearm. It's basically just become an object. It's no longer an inherently dangerous instrument, right? It's just a toy, essentially. But you can make those things look quite realistic to the point where the cinematographer, because one of the arguments that I've heard is that the cinematographer might want the real gun to check the way the lighting reflects off of the gun or something like that. We already know from the filings of, I believe, both David Halls and Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, that they had all three types of guns on set, or 3 or 4, can't remember. And so they had the replica gun version of that .45 long Colt, right? Which means that that replica is accurate, or accurate enough to check the lighting or reflections or whatever that needs to happen. So that's an interesting source of negligence in of itself, is using a real gun in practice when you didn't have to, right? So that's an interesting one on its own. Okay, so then the shot happens. There's details of the events happened. Let's see. It is a bullet. We all know that. Okay. Baldwin approached responding deputies on the day of the shooting, wanting to talk, which is their favorite thing, by the way. The deputies aren't... Baldwin's emotional, right? Like, he just did a thing, he doesn't know what happened, right? The deputies are like, we love taking advantage of emotional people. We'll just stand here and let you blab, 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 right? And we've got our body cameras on, you don't even know. And so they're happy for that to happen, because he was the one who, quote unquote, fired the gun, which is, I'm sure, a quote that comes out of his actual mouth, which is idiotic. He was referred to and later interviewed by the detectives. Baldwin later asserted that he never fired the revolver, so now we've got an inconsistent statement. Do inconsistent statements happen sometimes because you either interpret words differently the second time you use them, or because you genuinely misremember it? You remember it a different way the second time. Of course! But guess what happens? What the state is always allowed to use as evidence? Prior inconsistent statements. Why? Because the rule, the way the court is designed, is to allow the jury to decide whether or not that prior inconsistent statement is material or not, right?
That is a very wild, inconsistent statement, though. It's not like a small detail,
Actually, in his defense, I will say again, because I really want to give them the best shot they've got, right? In his defense, you can use the word fired in two different ways. Like, you could mean, like, I fired the gun in that it went off in my hand, right? Like, you can mean it in that sense. Or you can mean it in the sense of, like, I fired the gun because I intentionally pulled the trigger, right? They don't care which one, we can use logic and his tonality just like the jury would, right? And look at the tape and decide if he actually meant it in two different ways. I don't think so, looking at his statements. But so I think they are truly prior inconsistent statements. But it doesn't matter. The prosecution will use both anyway, even if it's obvious that he meant it in two different ways. They'll take the chance that the jury will go with their interpretation of things. Most of the time. There are a tiny fraction of ethical prosecutors out there. I don't really like prosecuting much. Sorry to all the prosecutor friends out there. I've seen way too many terrible cases where it made me want to cry, because even though if the person was guilty, I was like, yeah, okay, they're still guilty, but you definitely did. You made arguments that weren't for the purposes of coming to the truth, but were for purposes of winning, which is not the prosecutor's job. The prosecutor's job should be for the purposes of coming to the truth. Anyway, the defense's job is to win. So, that's they're different roles. But unfortunately, prosecutors often don't fulfill their roles. Anyway, which makes sense politically speaking. There's no advantage to them not trying to win. There's only disadvantage. It's the way our system pretends that it doesn't exist. This incentive to win politically when it literally incentivizes exactly that. So, we don't have to pretend that. Let's see here. So, Baldwin later asserted that he never fired the revolver. And you notice another thing too. It says "fired" now, not in quotes, right? So now we're quoting "gone off." You see what I'm saying? Like, it's very easy to manipulate your understanding of the facts in these types of documents. Anyway, I never fired the revolver, and it just gone off. Baldwin made this assertion public as well in multiple media interviews conducted after the shooting. Media interviews and law enforcement interviews were conducted by Baldwin, and he displayed very inconsistent accounts of what happened during the incident when firing the gun that killed Hutchins. Now, I had watched almost all of these interviews because I was expecting to do an update episode. I will say that, I think a reasonable person will come to the conclusion that he kind of changes the story. As the rhetoric, mostly I think on Twitter, I think that's what controls his, view of how guilty he is, if that makes sense. He's looking at what people are saying on Twitter. Not a very good source for whether or not you're legally culpable or not. And so he changes the narrative slightly in different ways to try to combat the arguments that are happening in the public domain, right? And I think some of them are probably just genuine misrememberings too, I think, on top of it. I don't think I really don't think he intended to shoot her in a, he didn't murder her, right? Let's see. Okay, and then we learn that we have both photo and video evidence basically up until the actual shooting itself, which I think is fascinating. When that stuff becomes public, it will be dissected to hell. So I'm sure it's going to be a riot. Let's see. There we go. And then we have the testing done to the firearm. It can't fire on its own. And then we get to this other section, which I wanted to get to, which is interesting because it's another lesson in how you can be charged. You can be charged under two separate theories, basically, or as many theories as they want, as long as they're internally consistent. In this particular case, they're saying that he was reckless in two different ways. So they're saying even if he wasn't reckless in the first way, he was definitely reckless in the second way, right? The first way is what we've been talking about on the show, which is the rules of handling firearms and the rules of handling firearms on sets on top of that. The second way they're trying to get to him is by basically saying that he was also a reckless producer as someone who had custody of the set, basically. This is a way weaker argument reading through it. Like, way weaker. Not even, you could, if this was the charge, you could potentially beat this on the criminal recklessness. Although on the civil liability, on the negligence, I think it would be a pretty solid case. But beyond a reasonable doubt of recklessness, I don't know if I could get there exactly from this particular thing, because I would have a lot of questions about the nature of this producing role for Alec Baldwin. Is it just sort of a figurehead, which happens often with producers, right? I know this film is a passion project for him, or was, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's functioning as an organizing producer, right? In the sense that other producers might be, and there were other producers involved. So, again, to give him the benefit of the doubt, I have a lot of questions when I read these paragraphs. It sounds like a prosecutor who just wants to make sure they cover this base as well. In this particular case, I don't think it's unethical, because I think there is, there could, in good faith, be probable cause for these reckless acts as well. So I'm not quarreling on those. But yeah. So it says, since the shooting, Baldwin has asserted publicly that he is an quote-unquote expert in the realm of firearms and filmmaking. This is rich. Investigation has revealed that Baldwin has been involved in at least 40 films or TV productions that involve firearms, with Baldwin either directly handling firearms or in a scene with firearms being directly handled and or fired by someone else. Notice that could be one film, technically, logically speaking, where he actually handles the
I thought
fire.
about that too.
Yeah. Not likely,
also,
obviously.
Ben has disconnected, it seems.
Oh, no.
That's concerning.
Yeah. Is he in the Discord chat? Maybe he has to charge his laptop. Sometimes happens.
Potentially, yeah.
Okay, and then there's a whole bunch of other claimed negligences and or recklessnesses, including basically treating the crew poorly, having a whole bunch of schedule changes. Apparently, he showed up to none of the safety meetings.
That does not bode well.
That's not good. That alone might get me to recklessness if a few questions are just answered, about that. And to clarify too, you don't necessarily need to do these meetings if you know the rules of firearms and you're a seasoned professional, but in the film standards you do. So there's still a you should have done the thing aspect of this anyway. There's parts of this that have to do with Hannah Gutierrez Reed and hiring her and handling her and stuff like that. And there's an interesting part. On October 20th, 2021, the original camera crew resigned, citing safety concerns. I actually talked about this. I didn't know it was the camera crew. I don't think I specifically said the camera crew. I said a group of filmmakers had left the set due to safety concerns. But this says resigned, which is a stronger word than I was using. I was saying that they had left potentially for a few days that we didn't know. This makes it sound like they just quit, which resign can mean many things, I guess, potentially. Or maybe it's not true. Who knows? Citing safety concerns, commute times and distances, pay, and other issues. Now notice how it doesn't highlight which of the ones were the most important ones for the crew. Right, it could have been the case that only one crew member cared about the safety concerns because they were particularly meticulous in ways that weren't reasonable. You could make the argument maybe, but the rest of them were just it was all about pay. So I'm just trying to highlight how this document could be slanted. Okay, it was an impromptu rehearsal, and loading. There we go. Impromptu rehearsal. And then basically Hannah Reed leaves the gun without it being watched multiple times, which is a violation of safety standards, which is being pegged on him because he's the producer, which is a bit tenuous to me. You would have to show me that he knew that she was doing that and that it was his responsibility. So it was unjustified that he ignored it, basically. So, that he was the one expected to correct such things. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the charging document. Pretty straightforward. I think pretty bad for him. I would plea if I were him, but he's talking like he's not going to plea, which sometimes happens when you're trying to test, you're trying to, leverage your negotiations with the prosecutor. I kind of doubt that the prosecutor cares, because the case is kind of pretty, cut and dry to me, so far at least. I haven't heard contravening facts that would convince me otherwise. But finally, I wanted to talk, because this was charging documents related to Alec Baldwin. I just wanted to touch on, because he's the celebrity, obviously people focus the most on him. But really quickly, Hannah Gutierrez Reed was also charged with involuntary manslaughter, which carries a penalty up to 18 months of jail in New Mexico, which is, I think, on the lighter side, actually, just off the top of my head. Some states it's up to 10 years, depending. So, you're kind of lucky there. Involuntary manslaughter, 18 months, and some mandatory probation stuff, and some restitution. Restitution is basically the money owed for your crime to repair the damage. So probably owed to the Halyna Hutchins family if you're convicted. Okay. Now, one thing I find really interesting is that they're being...
what was Alec Baldwin's? I don't know if you said it already. I missed it. What was his potential time he's looking at?
18 months, both of them.
Oh, okay. It's both 18. Okay.
Yeah, both involuntary manslaughter.
That is very... Yeah, it does sound light.
I mean, given that, we're talking about... It's not... There's a different charge called reckless endangerment, right? Reckless endangerment is basically the same thing, except no one died, right? In fact, no one actually has to get hurt. It just has to be possible that someone gets hurt in that way, right? So it's interesting that they have the option to go down to reckless endangerment, but the punishment for involuntary manslaughter is already low. I don't know, whatever. I mean, different states do different things, so that's just how New Mexico does it. So they're being tried together. As you can see, this stream has been mostly about legal stuff because I think this is a good way to bring people into this world. They're being tried together, which honestly, I understand why it happens. And in this particular case, it might be one of the better cases of this happening. But this is for defense rights, right? Oftentimes what happens when people get tried together is the guilt of one rubs off on the other, right? Like, imagine you're in a court case where two people are on trial for murder. One of them actually murdered them, the other one didn't. And you get all this evidence about the one person who, and all the state just starts trotting out all the evidence about how this one person on the other side murdered them, and trots off no evidence or barely any evidence about the second person, where they're sitting side by side in front of the jury.
They just kind of implicated together. It's just
yes. It's highly prejudicial, and way more prejudicial than I think the courts account for. In this particular case, you could make an argument potentially for Hannah Gutierrez Reed being prejudiced by being tried alongside Alec Baldwin. And the particular case she could make is say, look, judge, we might be equally guilty, right? But the charges could be utterly, the punishment could be utterly different, right? The sentence could be utterly different. And the only way we can ensure that that's done fairly is if we have two separate cases where the facts aren't intermingled, right? That's arguing about, because usually sentencing is done by judges in most cases. You're arguing to the judge that they're not going to be fair. That's essentially what we have to do, right? And judges don't think of themselves this way. Just, psychologically. They want to think of themselves as fair. They're like, no, of course I can separate. But you look at it in reality, you watch cases where people are tried together, it doesn't even have the semblance of fairness when people are tried together and have completely different fact sets, or should be thought of separately. Then there's the guilt aspect of it, which in this case they're probably both guilty, just from what I understand of the case now. But even so, there's a power dynamic difference, right? Alec Baldwin is super actor. There's so many ways this could go wrong. The jury is all going to know who Alec Baldwin is, or at least half of them are going to know who Alec Baldwin is. You're not going to be able to find a jury that doesn't know one of the party members. It's going to be impossible. And this is a phenomenon that's actually more recent. I mean the past 10 years. It's been hard to find juries that can actually function properly with celebrities because the internet. Everyone knows who everyone else is now. Even minor local cases, you'd be surprised that they can't get juries where someone doesn't know anything about the case. It's very, very difficult and a problem. But in this particular case, a lot of people like Alec Baldwin, right? They may not know anything about him personally, or maybe they do, but they might like him for many reasons, for any particular reason. And what may happen is that Alec Baldwin's lawyers might start to throw Hannah under the bus and make her the villain in this case. It's very conceivable. I mean, honestly, if they don't do that, they're kind of stupid. They should. I mean, maybe not morally speaking. If I were Alec Baldwin, I wouldn't do that. Morally speaking, I don't think that's good. If you think that person doesn't deserve it, unless you do think they deserve it, right? But on a pure optimal strategy end, if they don't do that, that's kind of dumb. You should be leveraging his star power like crazy. You should be like, hey, Alec Baldwin never did anything wrong. Of all the times he did it was only when she was here. He only worked with her one time, and she was new, she was stupid. Look at her Instagram, look at her TikTok. She's a dummy, and when I say that would be the strategy, they will literally do that to her. And they're being tried together. And I don't think that's, potentially appropriate, even in this case. Maybe not. But she, honestly, the facts are not with her as well, because the question will always be, how did the bullet get in the firearm? And she's literally responsible for that. And any answer other than an act of God is going to be like, recklessness, pretty much.
Well, you would have to, or it could have to come like it could be something like Alec Baldwin himself put it in, or something. Like that,
yes, you're right.
Like, it just has to be like after, where like at the point where she's no longer like directly responsible in that type of way anymore.
Yeah, exactly. You're absolutely right. Like, he had to like sleight of hand a bullet in there, or maybe not even sleight of hand. He turned around and then he put a bullet in there. That'd be hard to prove. I mean, the defense has to prove nothing, right? They just have the beyond a reasonable doubt standard. But practically speaking, do you think that you can make an argument that it's reasonable to consider that reality? Probably. And so, yeah, she's probably going down. And there's a whole bunch of mitigating factors. I've seen her legal team and a bunch of people throw around sudden changes in her duties, that she was responsible for more things than one that she had signed up for, complaints to other producers that things weren't being done right. She had done that. I shared, I think in one of our news updates, that she had said that she had complained to a producer or a higher up of some sort that safety procedures were being ignored and that she was being pressured on time. That she's inexperienced, that the COVID procedures at the time forced her to be away from the guns when she shouldn't have been. Deference to the status of Alec Baldwin, not wanting to embarrass him, wanting to have more jobs, and the force of habit of being unchecked on that particular set, meaning they had done this so many times by now. This is the final scene, by the way, that they were shooting. They had done this so many times, and safety had been ignored the whole time. So, you fall into a habit, and your higher ups accept it, and so why don't you accept it? Does any of these arguments have anything to do with criminal recklessness? No. They have nothing to do with criminal recklessness, because the best argument you've got probably has to do with the fact that you were being demanded to do something, right? So let's say the COVID procedures, right? So you were being demanded to be in certain zones, right? That's probably the best argument you've got. The problem with this argument is that you should quit. That's what you should have done. So you go, what should I have done? They were telling me I had to do this in order to keep the job. You say, sorry, I can't do this. I'm gonna quit. That's the right legal answer, and she didn't do that. So that's a problem. So none of that matters, legally speaking, probably. And then the last thing I'll say is, why did this take so long? Remember, my initial prediction was that he would never be charged?
Right. Mm-hmm.
It took, I think it's 2 years and some months. We're literally bordering on...
There's no way it's been 2 years.
Yeah, it has.
Were we talking... Didn't the date say that you read it a little while ago, so October 2021? So a little over a year. A year and 4 months.
Wait.
Okay, a year and 4 months. Okay, yeah.
Okay, let's say, I was like, I don't know if this podcast has existed for 2 years yet.
That's true. But a year and 4 months, right, is a really long time to charge someone. Really is. Unless it's a cold murder case, but this was not that. Everyone knew, Baldwin had the gun in his hand. That was never in dispute. And he did so many interviews where he basically admitted to the recklessness. Why? I don't know. I have no answer for you, because I'm not going to look into the local politics of this random town in New Mexico. So, if you're curious, do your own research. But the lesson here is that the justice system is just as political as the rest of the branches. No one wants to hear that. Everyone wants to believe that somehow the scales of justice are somehow magically from God, balanced in the courts. That is nothing but false. Very, very false. Judges are politicians. It's the biggest thing that people need to get across in their minds. They're either politicians by proxy or they're politicians directly. In some states, judges are elected. They're literally elected. That makes them a politician. They campaign. That's a politician. In other cases, they're appointed. To be appointed, you have to be appealing to a politician. And that politician is going to appoint you for a reason. And we pretend, for some reason, that this is not the case, when even the founding fathers envisioned this as a political system. It's combative on purpose. Like, we don't have guilds for judges. We have appointed or elected judges or something like that, right? So, judges aren't perfect. That doesn't even mean that there are no impartial judges. That's not even what I'm saying. I'm just saying we need to look at it in the right light instead of in like a fake light, basically. So I don't know why it was charged down, but it's abnormal, and because it's abnormal, it makes me think that there's a reason that's not just they were collecting more facts, right? There's probably something particular about why that I don't know, and if you're curious, you can look it up. So there you go. That's my segment.
Nice.
Yep, that was very long.
It was informative. Yeah, it was probably as long as the podcast is normally in full.
Yeah, sorry about that. Oh man. But hopefully, my goal, I think, with this episode is pretty much like, if Alec Baldwin can fall in this hole, so can you, right? Like, don't be Alec Baldwin. I mean, he did a bad thing, probably. So, like, he is culpable. He should take responsibility for it. But when you do something, and you don't know whether or not, let's say your moral framework is, I accept responsibility for my actions. That's great. You should have that moral framework. That's good. But you don't know if you actually did an illegal thing, right? That's especially when you don't talk to the police. So if you're not turning yourself in, don't talk to the police. Ever. So, there you go. Yeah, that's my segment. And none of it was legal advice.
Yes, of course.
Okay. Cool. Are we ready for a quick round of AWR?
I guess so, yeah. I am, at least.
Do you guys have to go anywhere, or?
The only concern is my roommate might just walk in at some point, because he had to work. He has work at this time, which works out. I don't know when it ends, though. So, yeah.
Gotcha. 99 Crime says hashtag not legal advice, exactly. Are you good, Ben, or?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. All right, and here we go.
Mixed media music.
All right, welcome to Mixed Media Music, the portion of Mixed Media Podcast dedicated to discussions of music, in particular with an emphasis on film and media music. My name is Ben Costello. I'm a flute player and a media composer, and I'll be assisted by my co-host here, so let them introduce themselves.
Yeah, my name is Irving Nestor. I'm a filmmaker and media entrepreneur. I own a company called Ariella, based out of Mount Carmel, Pennsylvania.
And I'm Nathan Nestor. I'm a 3D modeler and game developer.
All right, so today on Mixed Media Music, we have Arguing with Reddit, a weekly segment in which one of us, this week is my turn, will be responding to hot takes or opinions or things like that, questions from the internet. Two of these three will have been picked out by my co-host or their representatives, and I've never seen them, so you'll get my spontaneous thoughts on them, and one of which I picked out for myself. And we're going to try and keep this short because our while filming this live, the previous segment, very informative, but went a little bit long. So try and keep this concise.
Cool. And along that theme, let's start with yours. So go ahead.
Sure. Okay. So
that is the wrong image.
Oh, whoops. Oh, you can go ahead and explain while I'm trying to get the right.
Oh, sure. Okay. So this is from our composer on Reddit, and the actual question, post, whatever discussion, it's not that interesting to me. Apparently, a lot of it got deleted because the person said some controversial things. But I'm particularly interested in a segment of a section of comments here. So I can find it exactly. But
I'm trying to find it too.
Yeah, let's see. I'll just pull up the screenshot that I took and sent. 1 second.
Mhm.
Stream media. Okay. Okay, so this person, so this kind of comment thread, it's kind of on this thing that comes up a lot on, in discussions with contemporary non-media composers, right? Which is that, well, if you try and write, when someone says, I want to write, in a style like some past classical music style, people say, well, if you want to sound like Beethoven, why no one's going to listen to you, because if I want to hear something that's in the style of Beethoven, I'm going to listen to Beethoven and not random guy on the, I've never heard of composing in 2023. That's essentially the gist of this comment thread, right? Right. If you tell me to write. If you tell me that you write similar to Beethoven, then I'll listen to Beethoven instead of you. If you tell me that you write impressionist music, then I'll listen to Ravel instead of someone else instead of you. If you tell me you want to write something atonal, I'll listen to the second Viennese school. And then one person replies, that's probably why classical music is going downhill. Everything is written and nobody hears it anymore. This observation is not just a personal opinion, but a trend that can be observed in society. Even in Europe, there's a decrease in appreciation and interest in classical music compared to the past. Okay, so like I said, this is a kind of thought that comes up all the time when talking with people who are writing classical music today, right? And people who, in particular, who don't want to write in a more, avant-garde style that is whatever is considered avant-garde or, today. That if you want to write like people who are dead, there's no reason for us to listen to you, right? Because the dead people are dead and their music is great, so why listen to someone living trying to be like these dead people? And that's it. I think I've probably said something along those lines on this show at some point, but it's kind of it's an opinion that's kind of worth exploring, right? Why do we have this attitude that you can't write in an older style, and that all the good music in that older style has already been written, right? And there's no reason to listen to another person writing in that style outside of that given time period. And I'm not really entirely sure why we have this attitude. It's a little bit curious to me. And now I'm not entirely sure this is why I would say, as this person last comment says, that this is why classical music is going downhill. I do think that we do have an issue, right, where in classical music, we don't have a culture anymore of living music. I mean, yes, there are lots of people out there who write concert music. Most of it never gets performed or is performed, for the composer's spouse and the janitor who happens to be cleaning the hall, or it's performed once in like a small setting and never performed again. No, we have a kind of a polar opposite musical community in some sense that existed for most of what quote unquote Western musical history, where music was almost entirely a living art, right? And composers outside of very specific contexts, like say the Pope has asked me to write a new mass to be said at the done at the Vatican in the Middle Ages, right? Yeah, okay. The expectation there is that my music is going to last for a long time. It will be in use by the Vatican for decades, if not centuries. Outside of that, for the majority of musical history, music really is only a living art. Your Western classical music history, it's really only a living art. There's not really an expectation that music is going to survive and be played much after I have written it and put it out for performance. And I mean, there are practical reasons of why that is true. Recording, publication of sheet music is not a huge thing. So when you go into a concert hall, you're going to hear something that's been written recently. The composer's probably still around, probably in the audience, if not conducting it. And I'm not going to go, to the concert hall to listen to someone who died, wrote 50 years ago. It doesn't really start changing until the middle of the 19th century, where music becomes more of like, well, we have the establishment of canon, and we've gone into some reasons why that happens in other shows, probably dozens where we've touched on parts of that. I don't know. I guess to me, is the reason that we don't have, it's two parts. Is the reason that we don't have a living art because nobody is allowed to, we don't want to listen to people who write in older styles? I'm not sure if that's necessarily the because, and going further, because all the good stuff has already been written in the older styles, and we don't need more in the older styles. I'm not sure that's necessarily the reason that we don't have this living art so much anymore, where it matters that people write. It doesn't seem like that anymore. It doesn't seem like it matters that anybody writes classical music. It doesn't have an impact. Almost nobody could name a living classical composer. And when you go to the concert hall, yeah, there'll probably be a token new work on there. A lot of symphonies that you hear, you've never heard of the composer, you'll never hear of them again, right? But we satisfy the requirement. Yes, we're including, living composers, and in particular, we're including, composers from historically marginalized groups. Yes, to me, this is more of a cosmetic thing, right? Because you cannot name this composer of some new work that you didn't like, probably from historically marginalized group, and you'll never hear of them again. That's just kind of the way it goes. It's kind of a token thing. Yes, we've thrown them on our program. But I don't know. So there's a couple thorny questions here, right? And I don't really have a good answer to them. But I'm not opposed to listening to someone who can write in a Mozartian style if they do it well, if they're living right now. I don't see why I have to confine myself to Mozart if that's the kind of style that I want, right? I mean, obviously Mozart is the best Mozart of all time. No one's going to be a better Mozart, but like in a general kind of, Viennese 1790s style, which is beyond just Mozart. If somebody wants to write like that, I mean, why? I don't really see why I wouldn't want to listen to them. It just will not it won't replace Mozart. I can think of examples too. In the 20th century, a lot of music that is not in avant-garde or whatever was avant-garde at the time, not written in that style, it gets kind of thrown under the bus. Not under the bus, that's the wrong metaphor. It gets kind of covered up by musical history. Sorry, wrong metaphor. And for geopolitical reasons as well. Like there's lots of classical music written in Russia, right? Soviet Union. That is, not quite neo-romantic, but it's much more. It's not avant-garde. And we don't know about it in general because, well, again, historical, geopolitical reasons, but it's also just the narrative of art. But would I say that, if I'm listening to Shedrin, who is still alive, he's like 100 years old. I know it's a really long answer here. But if I'm listening to Shedrin, fantastic Russian composer, would I discount his music because he's writing in a style that's a little bit closer to Rimsky-Korsakov, but like 50 years after Rimsky-Korsakov? No. Personally, I don't. I don't know. A lot of complicated questions touched on by just these couple of comments here. They really aren't that related to the actual post. It was kind of my not very conclusive thoughts on those.
Cool. Very good answer. All right. This next one is from Producer Wife. And I don't know what it is, so let's see. So it says, there are a lot of great documentaries that are ruined by excessive music. I was watching one tonight. I literally had to turn off. Wow, that bad. the content was great and interesting, but the music was nonstop intrusive, and I felt like it was trying to manipulate me into how to feel. Music of a specific time plus place is good. For instance, if it's about history or culture, and so the music is used to evoke the mood of the situation, that's okay. I'm more talking about composed music, frequently going in between grandiose swelling and overly saccharine. Is that what this is?
Yeah.
Piano.
Sugary. Yeah.
Yeah. And more often than not, bland and heard before. So that's the...
Okay. I like this because, when you first started reading this, my first thought before you got into the into some of the later part where the person uses the word manipulation, right, is that you can go back to some of the earliest episodes of this podcast where we talk about film music as manipulation, emotional manipulation, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but people like to say, observers of film music, film composers, that a lot of times you feel the most manipulated with documentary music. So that's going to be what I said before the person mentioned the word manipulation. So there we go. Yeah, that is kind of, when you don't have so much of a narrative, right, and you're trying to present facts, music can very easily become just another tool in the toolbox of presenting your narrative. We're talking about prosecutors, right, presenting a narrative of a trial at a trial earlier. Music is just kind of a tool in that kind of vein. It doesn't even have to be like, I think the most recent documentary that I watched, I didn't get all the way through it. I was watching some of Ken Burns' jazz. And very little of this, there probably is nothing that is originally composed for this famous documentary. It's all jazz, right? But there are so many. It's not even like it's manipulation in that it's trying to, make me like appeal to my emotions. Like, oh, I feel bad when Bix Beiderbecke dies, right? At the age of, I don't know, maybe 27 or something. No, there's literally like historical things that the music, because I research this stuff and I pay attention, I might be aware of it. But the average person is not going to be aware of how the narrative is being manipulated. For instance, a lot of times, we'll have, in this documentary, Wynton Marsalis comes on, he's describing this playing of this, foundational trumpet player from the very, very earliest days of New Orleans jazz, for whom we probably have no records in existence, or if we do, they're not used. And he'll be describing this person's playing, mostly whether it's from people, him inferring what this player's playing was like, or maybe from his own impressions of the recordings, but not presenting it as such, just saying, oh, his playing was like this, and then you'll hear like this trumpet playing, and it's never made clear that that's Wynton Marsalis playing, not some trumpet player from 1917. No, that's Wynton Marsalis playing in whatever year this came out, in like 2002 or something. That in itself is, you can, maybe a good reason or not, that is in some sense kind of changing the narrative, right? I don't know that I'm not listening to this trumpet player whose music is being described to me with words while it's being played in the background. So it's something to be really thoughtful of. I'm not going to, say that it's necessarily too intrusive. It probably varies in case-by-case basis. But you want to keep in mind that with a documentary, it doesn't have to be a documentary about music like Ken Burns' jazz is. But any documentary, the music is probably more of a tool in the toolbox to be used by the director, creators, to present a narrative the way they want to present it than it is even in like just a narrative film.
Makes complete sense. Do you remember we're seeing I think I watched it with you, but I'm not entirely sure. Back in our dorm, but the documentary Icarus.
I don't remember. Oh, yes. Is that the one about like Russian drug? You know.
Yeah, in the
Yeah.
Olympics,
Okay.
like the cheating in the
Yeah.
Olympics. It won an
Yeah.
Oscar.
Yes.
I remember the music in that being so annoying. Oh my gosh. Like it was so like just on the nose, like
Because the director asked the composer and probably demanded enough revisions until they got music that would assist presenting the story from the director's point of view.
Yeah. And I don't know anything about the facts of that documentary. I have no idea, but it made me feel like I was watching propaganda. So it's like, I don't know if I believe how extreme this is. This is a little much.
Yeah. And like music is just it's more of a tool to be wielded, I think, in documentaries than it is if you turn on even a Marvel movie, right?
Yeah. Makes sense. Cool. All right. Last one is from Nathan, if you want to explain.
Okay. So this one, I'm going to read the whole thing because it's fairly short. The title is, this is from r/composer. The title is What Makes a Good Theme and Variations. So it reads, there's all kinds of Music Theory 1 level discussion online about the form from a bird's eye view, but I've noticed nothing at all about the craft of the form, about what distinguishes a good T and V piece, which I assume stands for theme and variation. I don't know.
I suppose.
Yeah. From an amateur or quote-unquote schoolwork one, or even a bad one. I assume that being too literally repetitive is one way to make a bad theme and variations, as is only having a couple variations. A Mozart-style construction where each variation is self-contained and played with a pause between each is probably also not exactly a refined technique today. What else is there? What do you look for or strive to create when using this form?
I mean, you could go about this many ways. You could have overlapping variations. You can, depending on what orchestration you're using. I would say, the kind of standard way of doing it in the 18th and most of the 19th centuries, I find kind of boring. Where it's just taking the theme and progressively adding more ornamentation or non-chord tones or whatever, and it just becomes more florid essentially. I find this a little bit painful to sit through, especially if it's really long. You can be more inventive with it. Like if let's take Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on a Theme by Paganini, right, which is a set of maybe 30 variations, where the theme is kind of disguised pretty cleverly, and it's not something where like, well, I know exactly what process he's doing to the theme here. Now sometimes you can, like, well, now he's inverted the theme in the most famous variation, which is what, the 17th variation or 21st variation, one of those two. If you're listening to it carefully, well, you notice that it's just like an inverted inversion of the theme. But a lot of them, what I'm hearing is like, well, this is a totally different like mood or set of orchestral colors. It just seems like it's a small miniature, and I know intellectually that it's somehow a variation, but I'm not sitting there trying to figure it out. I'm just kind of enjoying the process. I think that's probably more effective for me personally than to have this mental game of, oh, yep, he's adding, he's turning into like an Alberti based kind of figure, or oh, okay, now he's added this non-chord tone every, occasionally that kind of thing can work. Beethoven makes it work much better than, say, someone like Mozart. I think in Beethoven's last works, like his last piano sonatas, where, okay, I can hear exactly what he's doing with these themes. and how he's varying them, but each one is so wonderful in itself that I'm not that interested in the process. But sometimes if it's too like the only real interest is just the process, I kind of find that boring personally.
Makes complete sense.
Yep, gotcha.
Sweet. Want to take us out, Ben?
Yeah, well,
Or
thank you.
Out of this section, sorry.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening to Mixed Media Music. Make sure if you are listening to us or watching us in post, you give us a like and subscribe to us and let us know what you think and join us on our Discord. So that's it for Mixed Media Music this week.
Sweet. All right. And now to gaming. So here we... Oh, wow.
Oh, there's something on the screen.
There we go. Here we go.
Mixed Media Gaming.
Welcome to Mixed Media Gaming, the gaming segment of the Mixed Media Podcast. Today I'll be reviewing Half-Life 1. I know I'm like 20 years late, but I got there finally. Before I get into that, I guess we'll introduce ourselves. So I'm Nathan Nestor. I'm a 3D modeler and game developer.
I'm Irving Nestor. I'm a filmmaker and media entrepreneur. I own a company called Ariella based out of Mount Carmel, Pennsylvania.
Hi, I'm Ben Costello. I'm a flute player and a media composer living in Los Angeles.
Right. I think I'll just get into it. So, Half-Life is is perhaps one of the most known video games for. Well, I'm actually curious. How much do you guys know about Half-Life?
I know of
If
it.
anything.
Like, it's talked about a lot. Like, in gaming culture, I have not played a single minute, nor seen a single minute of footage of Half-Life, but I've seen art of Half-Life. That was it. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
I maybe have heard of it. I don't know. I'm not obviously I don't follow history of video games very much, so.
Right. It's like, the thing is, I feel like it's kind of well known and not well known at the same time. It's like, if I asked a random person on the street, do you know what Half-Life is? I would assume they say no, honestly. But it's like, within the video game world, it would be very, very odd to hear of someone who has never heard of Half-Life. The game came out in 1998, considered a classic, created by Valve, the creators of other notable works such as Team Fortress and Counter-Strike. Although I believe Team Fortress wasn't actually originally made by Valve, it was like a mod for Quake made by someone else, and they picked it up. But I don't actually know. So, Valve, the same owners of Steam. So what is Half-Life actually known for? Half-Life, at the time, was known for innovative graphics, gameplay, and story. I'll be analyzing whether that actually really holds up in today's day and age with as, for example, graphics have progressed quite a bit in 20 years. It's also known for its spin-offs.
25 years, right?
Yes, 25 years, yeah. Actually, it's its 25th anniversary this year. Actually, yes, exactly 25 years. Wow. It's getting old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, 99 Crime, just to read his chat real quick. He says, I know it has cool game design elements, and it runs on everything.
Sort of. I guess we'll get to that. Actually, both of those things, in fact. But yeah, it's also known for, aside from having being very innovative for its time, supposedly, it's also known for the spin-offs that came from it. So it's a modelable game, and out of it came Counter-Strike, Day of Defeat, and Team Fortress Classic. So, as I said before, I believe the original Team Fortress was a Quake mod, and then Team Fortress Classic, which was created by Valve, was a Half-Life 1 mod. And Half-Life 2 also, there's a Half-Life 2, there's many other Half-Lives, and expansions. Half-Life 2 gave birth to Gary's Mod, which is not a Valve title, I believe. Gary's Mod is independently created.
By the way, I've played probably many Half-Life 2 mods, but never actually played any Half-Life games.
I would assume that is actually the case for most people, for most gamers, is that they probably played a Half-Life mod at some point, but not Half-Life. And, Half-Life is the...
It's kind of weird to call it a mod when it's not an actual. You don't download the game then play a mod. You like.
Well, it's not a mod anymore, right? Originally, it was. It's like, for example, Counter-Strike Global Offensive is, just a standalone game at this point. It's not even it's not the same engine anymore as the original Half-Life, which ran off of Gold Source, which is the predecessor to Source, which is what I think Counter-Strike Global Offensive is Source 2, right? We're in Source 2. I don't know. I think we're Source Engine 2, but before that was Source, the original Source engine. Before that was Gold Source. And I believe Gold Source was either a derivative or is actually, I believe it's a derivative of the Quake engine, or is the Quake engine. I'm not actually sure. But Valve paid, is it id Software who's behind Quake? I can't actually remember. But whoever is behind Quake, Valve bought it. But not the whole engine, but at least like the right to use the code or something like that into Gold Source. So, yeah. Now it's very hard for me to review this game in like with using like the lens of the past, like when it came out, because I wasn't even born when it came out, and I haven't played games around that time, that many games at least around that time. It's hard to really compare like, oh well, are the graphics really innovative for that time? I'm just gonna take people's word and say it is. I mean, I don't really know, but I'm gonna assume so. But yeah, so the game is set in what's called the Black Mesa Research Facility, which is it's kind of at first kind of a cryptic facility, not really known what it was really about, other than something to do with the main character, whose name is Gordon Freeman, who that's the character you play as in a first-person type way. He is a theoretical physicist at the Black Mesa Research Facility. And the game sort of opens up when you're on a train on your way to the Black Mesa facility. You're alone on the train. What's interesting is the game has no instructions, like none at all, right? So when I first loaded up to the game, I'm watching the train ride. I'm just looking, taking in the retro graphics, right? Retro sounds. But okay, it's interesting. The scene is very long, by the way. It is maybe a 5-minute train ride. It's actually credits. Credits are playing, and the credits are very slow, one name at a time, just fading in and fading out. But it does that for maybe like 5 minutes. Because there are no instructions, I didn't realize that I actually had complete control over the character the entire time. I thought I was watching a video. So at some point, I accidentally, I don't know how I discovered this, I moved the mouse. I was like, oh, I can like look around. I was like, oh, that's the thing. I didn't actually realize that. It took me like another like 30 seconds to be like, wait, I can walk around too. Wow, that's crazy. It's kind of funny. But yeah, no instructions in the opening. I'm not going to explain the entire like lore, the whole story of the game, because maybe you want to experience it yourself for the first time. But I guess I'll say a little bit of the start of it. I guess I'll say the main plot point, which I don't really think like. Once again, the game's kind of old, so I mean, you probably already know this already if you intend to play the game anyways. But what happens is you, as Gordon Freeman, accidentally, while you're conducting a routine experiment, accidentally open a portal to another world and release a bunch of little alien monsters that try to attack everyone and kill everyone. So that's pretty cool. As you can see on screen, if you're not watching on audio only. Sorry, audio only guys. Today is not your day, I guess. But there's a video of some Half-Life gameplay. It looks like the opening train scene. As you can see, whoever's playing knows you can look around. So yeah, I'm seeing things for the first time probably. I've never seen before. Yeah, the game has a surprising amount of variety. It is like one moment you'll be clearing mini aliens from a hallway. Next moment, you'll be doing a jumping puzzle of sorts, maybe rearranging boxes and whatever to get the task completed. The next moment, you'll be launching guided missiles at helicopters, and the next moment, you'll be fighting soldiers outside the facility. So yeah, it's kind of a there's especially towards the end, it's sort of nonstop action. But there's always like a mix of what you're doing. You're never really doing the same thing over and over and over again. And I think there's a fault of a lot of first-person shooters that have like campaigns that are basically like shooting people story element, and shooting people apart is like the same thing. Just again, pretty much. Just perhaps a little bit of new scenery and stuff like that. There are definitely a lot of quirks to this game that you can tell from the game being, fairly old and coming from a different time and place. So for one, obviously the game looks old. that's just a given, of course. I don't even know if I consider that a quirk. It's just, I guess that's how it would be, how it was expected to be. It looks very old. A lot of it can look pretty comical if you're not playing. Like if you're watching a video of it and you look at certain characters, it's like, that just looks funny. the 2 pixels that make his face and the 4 polygons look kind of funny though, But when you're playing it, it's kind of surprisingly like, I don't say immersive, but normal looking in a way. You kind of just get used to it. And in fact, I would consider it less comical and more tense actually as you play. I'd say I figure it might have a similar effect as black and white movies, where when you watch a black and white movie, you're not really thinking like, this looks strange, there's no color here. You kind of just watch it because it's like just how it is, That's how you know it, and how you know it to be as old movies. And I figure perhaps if you've never, say a universe where we move straight to color film, right? We never made black and white film. That wasn't a thing. It was just color immediately, right? And you were to experience your first black and white film, that might be weird though, because you're like, why is it like this? Like I didn't, this is not an expected thing to happen. There's no historical precedent for that. But this is obviously a historical precedent for games looking like this, so it's less weird to view it like that. It's just kind of like your brain goes into that mindset of this is normal now, this is how it's supposed to be. Whereas if games never looked like this, I imagine it looked very exotic, very, very low resolution textures, low polygon count on everything. I'd say the only part that really kind of ruins it is just the one antagonist named G-Man. And his face is like a cube, and it's like, oh, it looks good. Definitely, that part I can see it being kind of comical because I understand that it kind of makes him look like, very rough, not rough in that say. But I can even see this technique being employed in modern times of having a very squarish, businessman cartoon 3D character kind of thing going on. It looks like a very stereotypical evil businessman. He's very, very square, right? I understand that. I understand what they're going with that, but I think the combination of it, low resolution textures, and the cube face just really just it makes it just have to be funny in a way. Another thing that's, I guess, a quirk in a way is that one thing I noticed is you can interact with everything. That's something that kind of caught me by surprise. Generally speaking, I would consider these things wastes of time. I often say things like, I really wish the developers would not, put time into this random thing, interacting with this random object when it doesn't really matter, when they can put more time into gameplay. But actually, Half-Life 2 I consider a pretty well-rounded game. I don't actually mind they did that. And it kind of piques your curiosity. What will the item do when I interact with it? I guess it's kind of silly, I guess, but it's an added benefit that it doesn't seem to detract much from the game. Some more quirks are the fact that I don't think I've ever witnessed this in a game before, which is weird. But if you die in the game to a monster and you respawn, generally speaking, when you respawn in the game. Well, actually, every game I played except this game, I feel like, unless I'm forgetting one. I probably am forgetting one, to be honest. But you respawn with full health. In Half-Life, you don't. You just respawn with however much health you had when you reached the checkpoint, which led to a really bad situation at the start when I had no health and I died, and I went back to the checkpoint and I still had no health, which made it very, very hard to progress. I eventually got it, but it was tough. It was also the start, and I wasn't really attuned to the game yet, I guess. As well, there's definitely you also don't respawn with full ammo, so however much ammo you use at that point is how much ammo you have. You have a crowbar, which gives you infinite hits, so you're never weaponless against the aliens. But in terms of your guns, is definitely a big aspect of resource management. You can't just be spraying infinitely, or else you'll be confined to your crowbar for half the game, which probably would not be fun. Another interesting thing I noticed with in terms of graphics limitations is the fact that NPCs tend to be just copy and pasted everywhere, the same NPC. It feels like there's 5 of them in the entire game, and as you walk around, and there are quite a bit of them, and you walk around, you see the same guy, and you could have sworn hey, didn't that guy like die in an earlier like event sequence? And yes, he did. He's just a different guy with the same exact body and facial features and everything.
Gotta save the RAM.
Yeah, I gotta save the VRAM apparently. That I will also say kind of ejects you from the experience. But one of the things where I wonder, since it was perhaps a more accepted and normal thing to happen back in the day, if that was just sort of something that you just like, it was what do you call that? You can like it's like a suspension of disbelief thing, right? Where it's like it's easier for you because you're used to that kind of thing, right? Used to just pretending that that's not really a problem, Whereas for me, I've never seen something like that before. It was very weird, to see the same dude again later.
Well, 909 Crime says health situation is pretty similar to the stuff that happens in System Shock 2.
I never played System Shock, actually. System Shock is an older game. I don't know when the second one came out, but I'm just gonna look it up real quick. System Shock 2. A year later. It came out a year later, so this is the same era exactly.
And by the way, I put up this is a remake. I don't really know what the history of this is, but the graphics are clearly updated. So
yes, I believe there
went through the troubles.
There is a high definition mod, which it gives you high definition textures, and I believe Valve at some point released it's like it's a spin-off or something. I don't know, but like updated graphics essentially. But I didn't play that. So I bought the Valve Complete Pack, so I probably own like all these things. I haven't played them. So yeah.
Another comment. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, not sorry. It's good.
I guess it's Kai Kairos actually. There you go.
Hey,
the YouTube name.
The winner.
Yes, the winner. Says, yeah, I think a lot of older games just have the expectation that if you need to save with more help, you'll make and keep the save from when you had more health. Oh, I see what you're saying.
Gotcha. That's interesting because I think that practice is generally like, it depends on the person. It's like kind of like almost like a controversial issue whether like saving like that is a good or bad thing. At least in modern times of games. Like some people are like, nah, you really should not do that. It's not the intended way to play the game. But if it is the intended way to play the game, like you claim, then obviously I think the controversy's gone, right? You can just do that. It's like, that's fine, of course. Yeah. Another thing I noticed is that like I'm pretty sure there are no cutscenes in the entire game in like a sort of guided type of way where you're no longer have control over your character. If anyone's speaking to you, you can move. It feels fairly natural. It reminded me of Cyberpunk 2077. I remember the scene where I thought was kind of ridiculous because you're talking to some character and it gave you the ability to move around, which I thought was stupid because you could literally like walk away from the character who was talking to you, and it's just really weird. It's very, very immersion breaking because, I feel like the natural thing for a player to do is kind of, like maybe fiddle around, walk around, jump on things, whatever, kind of stupid things. But it's like, it's kind of just strange, the fact that like it's a serious conversation that's happening. Some dude's talking to you and you're just jumping on tables. And it's like, okay, I mean, maybe you should have not let that happen. I don't know. Maybe a bit of a developer intervention would have been great. But I also understand why you might not do it, because there are definitely pros and cons to giving players control over cutscenes, or I don't know if I really consider cutscenes if the player has control per se. I don't really know what the exact definition is actually, but I
was gonna say, isn't that pretty common even today? To have games like that?
Where you don't
have full control during cutscenes.
I'm thinking mostly. I feel like in most story-driven games, it tends to not be like that, right? Because if it's a story-driven game, you're maybe trying to drive some sort of emotion, or you want to set up the framing in the exact way, right? It's like that. You don't want your character jumping on tables, that kind of stuff. But I can see the benefit of having you be the character, because I've mentioned this before, but there's like this two different feelings you can have from playing a story-driven game. One where you and the player, and the character, the fictional being in the game, are the same thing. Where you are the character, right? You're making all the decisions, whatever. You and the character are one and the same. The character's personality is essentially your personality, or the personality you choose to put on him. And then the second way of doing things, where the character and the player are not the same thing at all. the player is just experiencing what the character is doing, essentially. The character is just following along for the ride. The character makes all the decisions. The player doesn't have much of a say in it, maybe no say at all. So the difference would be Half-Life being the player is the character, versus Tomb Raider, where Lara Croft does whatever she wants to. I think that's literally, when I talked about Tomb Raider, that's when I first brought this up. Lara Croft is her own person. You have no say in what she does. You're just following along for the story, essentially, right? Now, when you noted like something that's notable is that in Tomb Raider, it's a third-person game where you're watching Lara Croft, which makes you sort of don't feel like you are the character as much. Well, you're first person, so the entirety of this game, you feel like you are the character more because you are literally in the eyes of the character. Which is why essentially the reason why I brought that up is because when you have cutscenes where you're able to move the character still, you never feel like control is taken away, and you always feel like you are the character. The player and the character are the same thing. When you take that control away, it can start to make you feel like you are you and the character are different things, which may or may not be intended. In this case, in Half-Life, it seems like that is not the intention. As well, I would say that is definitely not the intention, because they made other choices like the character has no voice. Gordon never says anything, which means that he cannot express opinions, at least, right? That would create dissonance between the player and the character. He essentially cannot disagree with the player because he is the player. He has no voice, right? Everything he does in the game is kind of obvious, right? So the entire game, what is he doing? At the start, he's doing his job as a physicist. Then he's, when the aliens appear, he's trying to find his way out, right? And then after that, I don't want to spoil the rest of it, but he does very reasonable things that anybody would do, right? These things, these I guess choices that Gordon makes, don't make you feel like you're not him. The reason being is that they're so obvious, and they're the only thing you can do, really, right? There's no other option to be made. The other option is to sit there and die. It's not it's really the only option is to fight your way out. And so choices like that where there's no actual he doesn't do anything controversial. It's very unambiguous, everything he's doing. These things make you feel like you are the player. And I think the game does, you are the character. And I think that makes that is very good on the game for having a very cohesive experience in that sense. A lot of the games, I think perhaps the developers don't necessarily understand this, and so it kind of feels like something in between, and it's am I the character? Am I the player? Am I supposed to be following the player? Irving's camera just disappeared, but I'm going to assume that's not an issue.
Okay, my camera battery died. That's what happened.
Okay. But so there's no. You are the player. You are the character. I keep mixing those terms up. You are the character throughout the entire cutscenes, if you want to call them that. You have complete control over yourself. The character has no voice, and the character makes no choices on his own that are not that are controversial, right? They're all very self-explanatory, and so that leads to a very cohesive experience in that sense. Another thing that is feels kind of different from the games I'm used to playing. I know there are a lot of modern games that are like this, but I'm just not used to playing them. So the game has no HUD, which feels nice. I'm a big fan of no HUD games. And even the HUD that exists is, I don't know if this is the right term, diegetic? Now, I know what diegetic means. I don't know if you can apply diegetic to things that are not sounds. But it is the HUD is not something that is slapped on to the screen, right? The HUD is a thing that is in the real world. So I'll explain, I guess. So Gordon Freeman has a suit called...
Well, you might want to explain what a HUD is for...
heads-up display. Yeah. HUD stands for heads-up display. It is essentially the same meaning as GUI, graphic user interface. I think those are synonymous. I'm pretty sure. But yeah, essentially it is the perhaps an ammo counter that's on the screen, right? Just a number that's pasted onto the screen. That's that kind of stuff, right? It's not it's typically, I guess in this case it's not the case, but typically it's not real world stuff. It's not stuff in the physical world. It's something to provide the player with information, stuff to provide the player with information that doesn't exist in the game's universe or whatever. obviously, typically speaking, in universes, you can't magically know the amount of ammo that's inside your gun. You can't, you're not gonna have like a little like thing that shows what gun you have out, stuff like that. But the game does do this, although there is almost no other HUD. So the things that are shown to the player are your health, the current weapon you have, and the ammo count you have, the current amount of bullets in whatever weapon you have. Now, you have Gordon Freeman wears this thing called the HEV. I can't remember what it stands for. It's essentially a anti-radiation suit thing / armor thing, whatever. But his HEV gives him the ability to see essentially his vitals, right? How much health he has, the weapon he has out, and the amount of ammo he has. That's what I mean by diegetic in a way, right? Like, it's not a sound, clearly, but it's like the HUD actually is a thing in the universe. Like, Gordon Freeman actually sees this. It's not just the player who sees this, right? I don't know if you consider that diegetic, because I think that might actually be reserved for sound, but it's the same, like, if you get what I'm saying, it's the same thing, but just applied to visuals. Yeah.
Oh, what
but yes. What? Huh?
Something inappropriate happened on the screen.
I did not see it.
Yeah.
I'm switching between videos to avoid, overusing any particular content creators' stuff.
You might have seen some modded gameplay, maybe? I don't know what happened. The game is pretty appropriate, I would say. So
it was one of those Twitch, subscribe, like a person just subscribed animations.
Oh.
And it happened to be inappropriate. So.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well,
not on purpose, sorry.
Unfortunate, I guess. But yeah, there's not even any directions of the HUD. The game, as I said before, doesn't explain controls to you, so I didn't really know you can look around at first. I thought it was like a video that was being played. So these are all pretty cool things, but despite these games, greatness, there are certainly some bad design choices, or bad, some things that didn't age well. So for one, there are certain points in the game where you die and it feels unavoidable. I'll give you an example. In an earlier part of the game, you're walking through a hallway, and I can't remember what kind of object it is. It's like some cabinet or something like that. I don't remember. It's just something in the room, right? It tips over and falls. It's a scripted event. It happens when the player essentially goes to somewhere where it would fall on them, right? If you walk into the cabinet, it will fall on you. It's the only way to get through, right? So what do you have to do to avoid this? You get near the cabinet, and when it starts falling, you back up immediately, right? The thing is, unless you have insane reaction time, you're just gonna die on your first time. You're not gonna know what's happening essentially, right? You're gonna walk there, it's gonna kill you. You're like, wow, I had essentially no time to react to that. There are multiple moments in the game that are like this, and it feels just kind of random and bad. It's it's not a test of skill or anything. It's just a way to eject me from the game, I guess. And now the next time you go through, obviously you know what's going to happen. You do a little dance, you step in the trigger hitbox, and then you walk away, and then it falls, and you go about your business. But it's why is that there? What is its purpose? Its purpose is to make you respawn, just to, I don't know what's going to happen. It just feels weird, So stuff like that is not welcome. It's also at times, the stereo panning of the audio is very aggressive at points, to the point where it feels uncomfortable, where it'll be as 100% of the audio is coming out of one headphone side, and then zero, the other side is just silent, dead silent, right? Not a hum of the room, nothing. Absolutely nothing's going on, and it is genuinely an uncomfortable feeling. I don't know if this is normal. I don't know if it's just a me thing where aggressive stereo panning is uncomfortable for everyone. But it definitely just it makes me want to take my headphones off. That's how I feel about it. That happened especially during the initial train spot, where if I turned around, I could the certain audio is coming from different directions. The train makes its own noise, but certain directions I'd be looking would just feel very uncomfortable. Also, lots of short loading periods. The game has no formal loading screen as you walk through sections. Essentially what happens is a very seamless loading situation in terms of you'll be walking down a hallway, and as you're walking down, suddenly you get a little loading thing. Like the screen doesn't go black; it just says loading, like a little text that says loading. Game freezes, loads something, the next area, and you walk to it. What's interesting is the lighting will kind of change a little bit of the room, which is interesting. But yeah, I mean, it. I don't really know what could be done about that. Obviously, with modern technology, we have greater RAM capacity, so we can just simply store larger levels. In fact, I would bet you can store, like, reasonably speaking, most of the game, on on the average person's computer, like all loaded at once. I mean, without too big of an issue. I wonder if there are mods like that. I don't know if that's possible to mod, but I'm just curious. But it feels bad. Obviously, maybe this is a technical limitation at the time, but obviously we don't really need that anymore, at least not to the extent. And so all the little short loading thing is kind of just annoying. It's not really a big deal. Obviously, at the time, once again, I'm not faulting them for making the decision. It probably made sense at the time. At the moment, it doesn't really make that much sense. Just part of it that kind of aged poorly, I guess. And I believe it was 909 Crime who mentioned it earlier, that it runs on everything. And one impressive thing is it does, despite being old, run on everything, right? It runs on modern systems, which is pretty cool, given that they have no foresight of what would come in terms of modern systems. But there was a lot of freezing at random points. And I'm going to assume it has something to do with, just like random hardware incompatibilities, just weird stuff. Like I assume, probably not any like technical fault of them. It probably ran fine before. It's probably just some, they obviously cannot predict the future of hardware and the software that comes with it, right? So you get a lot of weird stuff like that, like freezing. Yeah, it's pretty much mostly it. I guess the only other main complaint I've written down is an age-old complaint that apparently since 1998 they have not fixed. You walk way faster than NPCs. I don't know why. Sometimes you have to follow NPCs around. It's just you like tapping W for like 3 minutes, just tapping W. You can't hold it. It's just annoying. But yeah, that is that is pretty much all I'd say about Half-Life. I say generally speaking, good game, definitely worth it, especially because it tends to be pretty cheap. Especially get the Valve Complete pack, get a lot of games very cheap, get all the Half-Lives, all the spin-offs, whatever. Yeah.
Do you understand why it's like legendary or so talked about, or does it take playing Half-Life 2 to figure that out?
Well, as I said before, right, it's known for graphics, gameplay, and story. In terms of graphics, I don't actually know. I don't have a good reference of what graphics tended to be like at that time, so I can't really comment on that. Obviously, today, as would be expected, it does not hold up because it's 25 years later. I would not expect it to hold up. In terms of gameplay, once again, still don't have reference to what was normal, but it definitely feels different from what's currently going on, right? But that doesn't necessarily make it better, or worse. It's just different to me, I don't necessarily know if the design choices it makes in terms of gameplay. I'd say it's definitely a solid game, right? So nothing that's like, wow, it's like a really bad gameplay design choice. Even the thing of like just dying randomly, it's like, it's forgivable, I guess, even though it sucks, but it's still solid. And once again, I don't have that reference of comparing like were all games this solid in terms of gameplay. I don't know. Is anything here revolutionary? I've heard the AI is apparently a lot better than it was than games that came around this time. Once again, I don't know. I can't really check that, so hard to tell. It didn't feel stupid, but it didn't feel overly smart. It felt nice, I'd say. It didn't feel like like AI that kind of like stood in one spot, like the soldiers, for example, kind of stood in one spot and shot at you and went undercover and then stood up again and shot at you. I'm talking about the same loop that happens over and over again sometimes in some games. So I guess it felt smarter than that, which is kind of embarrassing because it means we've regressed, maybe. But and in terms of story, once again, I cannot compare. So I can't really understand why it was, highly regarded for its time, but I would say it is a solid game for sure for today's standards, even today.
Cool.
So yeah,
very cool. Make me want to play it just for the sake of it.
yeah. I gotta play the second one too, so we'll see how that goes.
Sweet. All right, you want to take us out
And
of
I'm
our
curious.
very long show? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, really quick. I just want to know. Oh, I was gonna ask a question. I know the answer already. I was gonna say, what prompt did you use for the thumbnail? But I remember you used my image and then you made variations to it. And my prompt was Half-Life 3 like box art or something like that.
It was CD box art.
CD box art, yeah. If you don't know, Half-Life 3 does not exist. I just want to see what would happen if you know.
And this one
Yeah.
was actually quite remarkable to me. I added the number 3 because Midjourney doesn't do, text very well. So I just literally I just typed the number 3 and picked the color from the thing. It was very easy. But like if you like, I didn't notice it at first, but until I was looking at I was staring at them. I was like, which one should I make variations off of? But this one is the logo in the cutout of what looks like a bridge, which is so creative. And
Wait, you see the logo? I don't actually
it's just
see.
instead of being like the logo's usually like sideways like this. It's like this. If you get what I mean.
Oh, I see. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, like the bridge,
heck?
like yeah, and then instead of doing like the half of something, it did half of some random robot abstract character thing, and then the number 3 would go probably where I put the number 3 if in this design, and the overall color palettes.
Right.
I was just like, whoa, this is actually kind of neat.
Yeah.
Yep.
And 99 Crime says, it's really refreshing to hear an opinion of someone that didn't play Half-Life as a kid. Actually, I have watched Half-Life reviews, and the thing that I always like, I mean, I thought it was kind of neat, I guess, is that everyone was always talking about in the lens of the time, right? It's like, oh, it's, in terms of what came out around this time, this is what it changed, improved on, whatever. But I think I watched 3 reviews. One of them was from a person who played Half-Life recently as in whenever the video came out, right? Significantly longer, or significantly past 25 years ago, is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, I didn't actually finish watching that video. It wasn't good. but I'd say reviews. It was just like with the lens of like what it was like in the past.
Cool.
So yeah.
Want to take us
That's all
out
to
then?
say. Sure. Thank you for watching the Mixed Media Podcast. If you like what you saw, go to mixedmediapodcast.com where you can find our Discord. That's good because you can yell at me for any issues you have with my review. If you think Half-Life is the greatest thing to ever exist, I didn't do it justice, you can talk to me about it. If you thought I give way too much credit, you can also talk to me about it. If you want to tell me why it was so revolutionary, let me know. Actually, join our Discord for that purpose, actually. That'd be good. That is the best way of contacting us. Easy conversation. Yeah. So with that, I think that's all, right? Yeah. Thanks for watching.
Shout out our locals people.
Yes, and thank you to Rob Sharma and 99 Crime for supporting us on Locals. You too can support us on Locals for a low price of $5 a month, I think, or something like that, and get a bunch of perks that you can find on our Locals. If you want to know where our Locals is located, you can go to mixedmediapodcast.com and you'll find a link to our Locals there. Bunch of perks, and our live whiteboard, which I forgot existed, actually.
Yes, it's actually pretty cool. I wish people would actually use it.
It's like a podcast feature that I've never seen before. It's like not a thing.
Exactly.
We were the first people to do this,
Oh,
literally state of the art technology right here, and no one's using it. So
State of the art, yeah.
yeah,
It's especially you artsy people out there, right? Like some of you can draw, I presume. Like you could just doodle whatever you want on here. Like that's so cool. Whatever.
I mean, it have to be good. It just has to be there. Honestly,
Yeah.
I'll be happy.
I guess it'll anonymously make its way onto the final product too, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Embedded forever. All right. Well, we'll see you guys next week.
Yeah, thanks
All
for
right, see
watching
you
and
guys.
listening.
Bye bye.
Look, tell a man no trouble. I don't want beef, man. I just want vibes. Big man like me, no need for the telephone hype. I got too much getting online. One rule, then dead I'm on site. Wrong move, I bet they gon' ride. No need for the telephone hype, nah. No need for the snoozing. Big whip outside, I'm cruising. Big stick inside, no losing. Better watch out for the snake and Judas is. Don't ask them who this is. I bet they know what I'm moving in. I bet I show it into a dim. How you hate and then lose again? How you hating my vibes? Why you wasting my time? Getting hype on my line. Tell a man I don't want feedback, I just want relax. Brand new whip, two-tone, I need that brand new hit. You know, like lean back, brand new bits. I live in we pack, man, you never gon' like us. Get them on sight now, let them on light. That way they know I'm more righteous. Look at my life, I'm living alright. I'm nice, you know I'm alright. Cause looking like Christ, no need for the hype or fight or